Kamal Hassan, former Rector IIUM, Professor Dr Azubi AZRA, former Rector, State University of Islamic Studies, Jakarta, Indonesia, Professor Dr ABDELAZIZ BERGHOUT, former Deputy Rector, IIUM, Associate Professor Dr KHAIRUDIN ALJUNIED, National University of Singapore, Deputy Rectors, Deans, colleagues, and honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the International Webinar on Islamic Thought and Sustainable Development, organized by our International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, International Islamic University, Malaysia, IIUM, Kuala Lumpur. ISTAC is dedicated to engage in advanced level study and research about Islamic thought and civilization at the national and global levels, with the goal to nurture comparative cultural and civilizational studies that is dedicated to the renewal of Islam and human civilization. Its mission is to produce a new breed of academics and scholars who are multilingual and multidisciplinary in their expertise, with knowledgeable understanding of the universal message of Islam for the advancement of Islamic thought and civilization, who can address new challenges and concerns facing the Muslim Ummah and humanity, which will enable meaningful living in the 21st century globalized world. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. The United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development is a challenge which needs urgent addressing by the different religious, cultural, and civilization parts of humanity, including the Muslims around the world. The international webinar is directed towards a discussion on Islam and sustainability. We have gathered a distinguished panel of speakers who will be addressing the topic of Islamic thought and sustainable development from the viewpoint of the Islamic worldview based in the Quran and Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and its relevance to contemporary times when humanity is facing different challenges on all fronts, especially in the areas of education, health, peace, justice, environment, etc. The topic of sustainable development is in line with the mission and objectives of ISTAC IIUM and its niche areas of teaching and research, which include Islamic thought, Malay Islamic civilization, comparative religion and intercultural dialogue, Islam and gender equity, epistemology, spirituality, and intellectuality in Islamic civilization, peace and security studies, Islah and Tajdeed in Islamic history, and comparative civilizational studies. Without taking much of your time, I first respectfully invite Professor Emeritus Dato DZULKIFLI Abdul Razak, Rector IIUM, to open this webinar by sharing his thoughts on the topic of Islamic thought and Sustainable Development. He will be focusing on Islam and SDGs, the case of humanizing education. فليتفضل تنسري Rector.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Let's praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this opportunity to meet on a very auspicious occasion. And I would like to congratulate Professor THAMEEM and the team in ISTAC for taking the initiative to organize an international webinar on Islamic thoughts and sustainable development, a topic which I thought is timely and perhaps time for us to sit down and discuss about it and get into the depth of it and make some better understanding of what sustainable development is all about, given the Islamic perspective. Now, when I look at this the list of panelists, I kind of regret in agreeing to join this panelist. I think I'm the least qualified panel member to talk about Islamic thoughts and sustainable development as such. But given the circumstances, I have no choice but to share with you some of the things that we have been talking about for the last 2 years in university, and in my case, perhaps for the last 2 decades, talking about sustainable development, not within the Islamic context per se, unfortunately. And therefore, this is a learning time for me, and I really look forward to listening to all the other august panelists and filling the gaps that I've been missing all this while. Now, I've chosen the topic, the case for humanizing in education, because that has been the context of what we've been talking about in this university. And maybe I can fill in some of the ideas that we have been trying to achieve within the last 2 years and how then we move forward, taking sustainable development within the context of the university's mission and vision as such, right? Can I have my first slide, please? So I will try and make do within the 20 minutes that's given to me. And I apologize from the beginning if I cannot do that well within that 20 minutes. Okay. Now, what is my what do you call claim to fame as well to talk about this subject? I'm not an Islamic scholar. I don't read Arabic, and I don't understand very well the perspective of Islam as many of you have. So I humbly submit and apologize if I make some errors along the way. But nevertheless, I think in the last 2 years, the university has managed to, quote unquote, up its profile, its visibility, and that is what we have got, I think, right now. University Islam Antarabangsa or International Islamic University has been since last April recognized by the United Nations University as the regional centers of expertise for sustainable development. We are, I think, the first Islamic university to be given this honor. And that means that we are able to articulate some of the ideas that we think it is important to be shared, not only among members of RCE, but also members worldwide. Yeah? We have given a status that allows us to get into high-level discussion. And one of the high-level discussion that we were involved with was the United Nations Environment meeting in New York in July, where we are also given this award as a Sustainability Institution of the Year, competing with more than 500 universities around the world. Alhamdulillah, this is something that is given to you, and I hope it is a blessing that allows us to speak about sustainable development given the situation that we are in today. So I'm going to talk within this ambit and talk about how do we conceptualize sustainable development within the university, given the education dimension that we talk about, humanizing education and such within the university. This thing
Next slide.
doesn't work. Does it work? Can we just press them? No? Okay. Now, that is really the summary of our strategic focus. As you can see, we have got 6 strategic focus, beginning with trying to develop or trying to nurture a balanced graduate, right? A balanced graduate, and then coming on right down to how it is relevant worldwide in the context of Rahmatan lil Alamin. Yeah? We use the tagline, Humanizing University through Maqasid Ash-Sharia and Sustainable Development. I hope you take note of this. The sustainable development, as far as we are concerned, go hand in hand with Maqasid Ash-Sharia. It is never alone. It is never on the premise that what was given to us. We have got the liberty of trying to understand sustainable development from the perspective of Islam, particularly on Maqasid Ash-Sharia. And therefore, I would like to elaborate a little bit on this so that we can get a larger perspective. And it goes through the whole rigmarole of balancing not only students, but also staff, yeah? Creating a situation of well-being, which is now, quote unquote, the word that we are used under COVID-19. Well-being and wellness is something that we cannot afford to dispense if we want to fight this coronavirus. Yeah? It means also we need to create values. And what sort of values are we creating? We're creating values of social solidarity, empathy, sympathy, working together as a unified whole, as humanity per se. We can never talk about an individual anymore, or even one community, or even one nation, but yet we need to talk about a holistic human being or human life as such. Caring is what we call the Rahmatan lil Alamin within our context. So that is the summary of what I'm going to talk to you about, and hope it makes sense at the end of the day. Can I have the next slide? Okay, no, dah patah balik. Okay, I think this one works. Okay. Now, this is not a new thing. This is, I think, a journal that was taken maybe 10 years ago, when people are beginning to talk about the future of the Earth, the future of the planet, and how do we manage it. I think I want to underline the word manage. How do we manage the situation we are in now, the chaotic situation, particularly given the pandemic coronavirus as well? How do you manage resources? Here it talks about water, but we also talk about air. We also talk about the many things that is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us. How do you manage these resources within the context of sustainable development, and inshallah within also the context of Maqasid Ash-Sharia. So this is not new, but the question is how do you do is perhaps something which is new that we need now to come to the brass tack, and how to manage this on a worldwide platform, as it were. Now, in other words, we are all very vulnerable if we do not manage this well. And we in the global south is more vulnerable than the global north, at least as it stands today. Because they are all prepared, they have got their infrastructure ready, they have got their, knowledge base ready, they have got all the policies ready, unlike many places in the global south, including the many Muslim countries and communities. So I felt it is very important for us to dwell into this. How can we be ready? How can we be prepared at the same time? Even then, with the global north, we say it is prepared, but when the coronavirus hits, we know they are not even as prepared as we think they are. Yeah, the number of deaths in the United States and UK alone will tell us their preparedness is not the kind of preparedness that we've been thinking about here in the context of big infrastructures, big money, and also big knowledge. It does not add on. At the end of the day, there is something which is missing. And what is that missing piece is something that we want to now find out. And I think the answer perhaps is within the ambit of Islam and the Islamic worldview. Okay? Now, that is on a global perspective. I think all of us can appreciate it. Yeah? But if you go into a very deeper level of very personal sort of discrepancies or discrimination, the way you want to put it, I'm quoting here the former finance minister who used to be the foreign minister of Nigeria at a World Bank meeting somewhere in 2008, maybe 10 years ago. And he made this comparison. The average African lives on $2.30 a day, all right? But the irony is a a kettle in Europe draw an average subsidy of $2.20 a day. I mean, I cannot get my head around this. How can the life of a human being and the life of a kettle in Europe is almost at par? The difference of 10 cents. Yeah. Now, this is the kind of discrepancy that we see when we talk about justice, fairness, and equity around the world. We are not only comparing men to men, we are also comparing men to animal, as though the life of a human being is worse than a cattle, or just as good as a cattle. And no wonder now in America, the blacks are still talking about Black Lives Matters. I thought we understand this right from the start, but it doesn't seem so. Where have we gone wrong? If you talk about in terms of education, where have education gone wrong as such that we do not even understand what is going around us? And is the education that weaving them in the context of sustainable development relevant or otherwise? These are questions that's been bothering me for the last decade or so when I took over and become the Vice Chancellor of USM as a science university. What are we doing in this context of disparity, and how do you get to the bottom of this? These are the issues that I think we need to look at. Yeah. Now, before the Sustainable Development Goal was sort of officiated, there was a meeting, and I'm fortunate enough to attend this meeting, which is in Korea, in Incheon, that talks about what's the new vision of education moving forward to the year 2030. Hence, we have the Education 2030 now. And under Sustainable Development Goal 4, we talk about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, not for a few, not for the selected, but for all, including everyone in the world, Muslims or otherwise. Yeah? And it has to be transformative, and it has to be universal. In other words, it is meant for all, that we can share a common platform to go into what we call EFA, Education for All. At that particular time was contextualized on what they call the Millennium Development Goal that started from the year 2000 and end up in the year 2014. All right? So 2015 was trying to explore what else can we do once the Millennium Development Goal expired in 2014. Okay? Now, these are the key things that this World Education Forum talked about. The right to education, equity to education, inclusive education, quality education, which is all not new to us. Yeah? Lifelong education means from womb to tomb. You start talking about education even in the womb, perhaps, right? Until it gets into the tomb. And of course, after you get into your grave, you are still learning something, right? But there's a new other thing that they also add on that talks about life-wide learning. What is the difference between lifelong learning and life-wide learning? I think many of us have not talked about life-wide learning. We are more familiar with what lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is about the depth of knowledge, okay? Whereas life-wide learning is about the breadth of knowledge. So in other words, I'm a science student. I will not be able to live with just the science knowledge. I need to broaden it. So I need to understand social sciences. I need to understand humanity. I need to understand philosophy. I need to understand religion. I need to understand all the breadth that there is within this world, including indigenous knowledge that is coming on very strongly. It is not just the dominant knowledge that we see in textbooks or in the website. There are other indigenous knowledge that we need to get to, because that is where the whole philosophy of sustainable development started. It doesn't start in Europe. It starts in our community 1,000 years ago. And hence you have words like Kizuna in Japan that talks about sustainable development. You have words like Ubuntu in Africa that also talks about sustainable development. We have words like Nunchi in Korea that talks about sustainable development long before the word sustainable development comes in. And in Malaysia, we thought the word sejahtera is about sustainable development in our cultural context. And therefore, it is a human heritage, a shared human heritage that talks about sustainable development, not necessarily contextualized in the Western form or by United Nations or UNESCO for that matter. And I think this is where the area that we need to inspect and look properly as we move into the Sustainable Development Goal from the Millennium Development Goal for 2015 until 2030. Okay? Now, this is where I thought that we want to bring in humanizing education, some sustainable development, with a larger overarching goal of creating peace, saving the planet, dignifying people, creating equitable prosperity, and working in partnership. The 5 P's are the overarching goal of sustainable development. In other words, you cannot work on just one goal. You need to work on all the 17 and how you connect it. Therein lies the challenges. If you talk about education, does education, for example, solve the problem of poverty? Does the education solve the world of being peaceful? Does education solve the world of life underwater? These are questions that was never asked before. If you sit for an education as a science student, you just need to talk about, whatever you do in the lab, pass your exam, and that's it. But under sustainable development, this is where the life-wide learning comes into picture. You need to take your education and make it functional in whatever context you're working at. I think this is the greatest demand on education moving forward. All right? And this is where I thought, the maqasid part becomes important. How do maqasid plays a role? Because at the end of the day, maqasid, I think, embraces all the 17 goals. You take any of these goals, for example, you take number 1, poverty, then what does it do? I think it relates to life. You cannot have life when there are poor people around. So already it is embracing one goal. You talk goal number 2 about starvation, hunger. Again, it relates to life. Yeah. You talk about well-being, health. Again, it relates to life. So these 5 goals or 5 maqasid is enough to embrace a 17 and even beyond 17. Somebody may crack another one, SDG 19, and say this is what it is. I am quite sure we can put it in either one of the 5 outcomes of the maqasid al-Sharia. So I felt in this particular case, the maqasid is anytime much more superior in the sustainable development goal alone. That alone, we have not introspective look at what Adin stands, what life means in Islam, what is intellectual lineage and wealth as far as Islam is concerned. That alone, I think, is a concept that is worth putting, projecting it to the non-Muslim Western world and say, look, maqasid is anytime better than sustainable development goal, but we need to make a case for this. We cannot be saying it for the unfortunate reason, the moment they ask me, give me one Muslim country that has practiced maqasid al-Sharia and remained sustainable, I lost my case immediately. Yeah, we lose our case immediately. The richest country in the world are the Muslim countries, but they are hardly sustainable. In fact, some of them are at the brink of bankruptcy. So we need to make a case for this by doing and demonstrating that maqasid al-Sharia is relevant in real terms, not just in hypothetical terms or in rhetorical terms, but in real terms. And this is what this university is trying to do when we talk about maqasid al-Sharia in the context of humanizing education as such. Okay, so we can also, I think, be underneath here. Sustainable development is also, as mentioned by Prof. THAMEEM, is part and parcel of the mission of the university. If I can just recall, the university has got 7 missions. 1 until 7, I've got one integrated knowledge, Islamization, Islamic moral, spiritual values, if I just can summarize it. Yeah? Number 5 is about international community. Number 6 is about intercultural understanding. Number 7 is about commitment to a deep sense of social responsibility. And number 2 is about sustainable development. It has been there since 1995. Thank you to Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Kamal Hassan, who was then the visionary rector who put this in. Yeah? Not only number 2 talks about sustainable development, if you go down the list, sustainable development must take on integrated knowledge, the wildlife learning that I talked to you about. Yeah? It has to do with international community. You cannot talk about sustainable development and remain where you are without acknowledging the international community. You need to talk about intercultural understanding before you can understand sustainable development. As I mentioned, what is Ikigai and Ubuntu and Nunchi is all about in a different cultural context. Where does the Sejahtera falls into this? We need to have this dialogue to understand the depth of sustainable development within the context of each country. And last but not least, it becomes our responsibility, our social responsibility, not just academic or political responsibility. It is part and parcel of our social responsibility, means to say it's part of the amanah that we want to talk about. Yeah. So, and therefore, if you understand this well, within the context is not just giving services. People look at sustainable development now, it's about green things and giving services. It is about social engagement. And this is what, again, what this university is trying to bring about. How do projects become, tied up to the knowledge that we've got? How do the knowledge translate into a project that serves the community, and not only serves the community, but also transform the community? So as we talk about sustainable development, these 3 levels must come into picture. The worst is about just giving services. Again, you get them engaged. But the most that we need to do is to transform the community around us. And that is a task of sustainable development. It is a practical task, not just a theoretical task or not just a rhetorical task. How to transform this is a question that we are going to address, inshallah, in a moment. Yeah? So if we factor in sustainable Maqasid al-Sharia, I understand Maqasid al-Sharia in a very shallow way. I think it is the 5 necessities for the individual. Traditionally, it's for the individual to be able to live peacefully in this world, and that world perhaps is what we contextualize in the planet, people, prosperity, peace, and partnership. It is about justice. On one hand, it's about elevating hardship, poverty, and so on. On the other hand, it's about eliminating prejudices, discrimination in its own intangible context. I think these are the 2 major areas, if I'm not mistaken. All right. I'll try to conceptualize this. I'm a rather visual person rather than a text person. So we talk about 2 things, 4 things that supports it. We talk about life, we talk about wealth, we talk about lineage in the context of future generation, and we talk about the intellect as far as that's concerned. And then we can talk about, one is more the intangible part, the economic thing that you can count, there's a KPI to it. But there's the other thing that most of us are not able to grasp this, and this is the intangible part. Yeah? The aqidah, the amanah, the ethics that cannot be quantified. There's no numbers to this, but yet it acts in a balance to make sure that maqasid is understood in the proper sense. And I think therein probably lies the challenges. So if you take this on, all right, and you try to understand this, then I begin to look at, when you talk about the maqasid, you probably will address the question of peace within the human being and his community. You are beginning to address the relationship between people to people. You're beginning to address issues of equality, perhaps, in terms of prosperity and so on and so forth. Yeah. But where are the rest when we talk about sustainable development? We talk about other dimensions at the same time. Yeah. So, for example, when we talk about climate change, how do maqasid fit into this? Where in the elements of maqasid that talks about climate change, global warming per se. It may be there, but we have not articulated it. I think it's time to articulate. So in other words, when we look at the 5 Ps, where is planet in maqasid? Where is partnership in maqasid? And where is the rest of the thing in maqasid? And this is where I think our task needs to be to add on to make sure that the understanding of maqasid becomes a holistic understanding rather than an individual, traditional, conventional way of understanding it the way I am made to understand earlier, right? So if you were to expand this whole idea of maqasid, then I would like to change the definition a little bit. It's the 5 necessities for humanity to be able to live at peace with this world and beyond. So we talk about the 5 Ps, yes, but we also need to talk about Rahmatan lil Alamin, that talks about not just life of the human person, we also want to talk life of other species. We also want to talk life of the non-Muslim rather than just Muslims per se. Yeah? When you talk about lineage, you're not going to talk about our generations, we're going to talk about intergenerations from many, many generations to come. And therefore, we talk about 2 decades, 3 decades, not just a planning of 5 years or 10 years, but in terms of decades, because that is where I think the intergenerational understanding is all about. Already now, when we talk about the post-COVID, we will not be able to understand it until we project it 20 years from now, what sort of world we are going to face, the so-called new normal. Yeah? So when we talk about wealth, we want to talk about resources that God has given us, not just the material wealth that bought, our car, our house, our handphones, but we also want to talk about the water, the air, the soil, yeah, the trees and things like that around us. And finally, when you talk about intellect, it's not just about the mind, it's also about the heart and the spirit at the same time. So as we broaden this idea of maqasid within the definition or within the understanding of sustainable development, we will have a different kind of a canvas. The future canvas for maqasid and education will be, I hope to explain it in the context of a balanced lifestyle. The moderation, the wasatiyah, whatever you want to call it, but at the end of the day, there's a lifestyle that we need to have when we have sustainable development, of course, with the maqasid understanding, the way I understand it. I apologize if I'm wrong, right? But if you look at education today, this is what education is, very compartmentalized. If we talk about economy, it must be industrialist. If you talk about ecology, probably is activist. You talk about STEM, is a scientist. Citizens, maybe culture, whatever. I'm just doing this in a kind of a very, segmented way, all right? But clearly, when you talk about sustainable development, this compartmentalization, as we talk about life-wide learning, do not apply anymore. So we need to disrupt this, right? Remove the compartmentalization and build another way of organizing knowledge in a non-structured way. And this is what we call the transdisciplinary understanding. Yeah? And therefore, we talk about the maqasid in that kind of a context. It's no longer, life could be economics, life could be science, life could be culture, life could be anything. And everything must fall into that. Similarly, the questions of intellect, yeah, not just scientific thinking, also philosophical thinking, cultural thinking, all the rest of it, I think will go into this dimension of maqasid that we talked about, with one other addition, and that is, I think, where we talk about our own spirituality, our own moral values, that is the heart of all things. And that is where I think the addition that we need to add when we talk about maqasid al-Sharia and humanizing university within this particular context, where the Ummah comes first. We become number 2. The Ummah needs to survive. If the Ummah survive, we will survive. If we survive, doesn't mean the Ummah will survive. And I think the equation needs to be turned the other way around. How do we then put the Ummah first so that we can be part and parcel of that participant? I'm trying to summarize this very complicated thing. I don't know whether I will complicate this again, yeah? But I want to look at the knowledge structure that we have got now. The knowledge structure is working within a knowledge space, something that we know within the knowledge space, something that we do not know within the knowledge space, which is out of the boundaries, all right? But knowledge needs to expand, and knowledge often expands when we meet with problems. Knowledge normally expands when we are curious about certain things, yeah? And there is now what we call this cycle of knowledge transformation, which this university is trying to create, what we call the whole institution transformation. And that is a kind of a place where we look at cutting edge sort of issues. What are the issues that we need to solve today so that the problem of tomorrow will be dealt with in a preemptive way? And this is what I think the engagement of this university is all about when we talk about humanizing education, right? Now, once you have this cutting edge and you solve a problem, you begin to push the boundaries of knowledge, getting into the unknown and making the unknown known, right? But we can only do that if we map it on real life. We cannot do this just on theory. We cannot do this just on abstraction. You cannot do this just on, words and not activity. So we need to map it on the state of humanity by looking at what is the community all about. What is the real situation in the community? How is our community doing? There's a kind of barometer that we need to look at so that at the end of the day, we can look at new possibilities of how to solve new problems or potential problems before we get lost into whatever is happening, all right? Then we need to look at what social change that needs to be done. And the social change has 4 elements: how to anticipate it, how to assimilate it, how to accelerate it, and how to exert it. These 4 elements needs to be there, and this is where I thought the maqasid comes in. The maqasid needs to be understood. When you talk about managing the future of Earth, the 4A must come into picture, together with the spiritual understanding, so that we can begin to expand the understanding of what new frontiers of knowledge is all about, and begin to co-create what I call the maqasid knowledge space, and also the maqasid knowledge system that embraces what is unknown to be known as far as Islamic worldview is concerned. Okay? Something that we need to imagine, something that we need to do, and something we need to now recreate so that the new knowledge space or the new knowledge structures will be dedicated for humanity, for rahmatan lil alamin, the way it is understood from my point of view, what maqasid sharia is all about, and hence enhancing what we call humanizing education within the structure that we are going to develop, inshallah. So I don't know why I'm making sense, but I'm going to stop here. I'm sorry, I took 10 minutes extra, Thameem. You can punish me for this, but I hope I make some sense, and I apologize from the deepest of my heart if I have said something wrong, which is something not compatible. I stand to be corrected, and I want to learn from you. So thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Tan Sri Rector, for your thought-provoking and stimulative presentation on the topic Islam and SDGs, the case of humanizing education. Tan Sri has highlighted in his presentation the relation between maqasid al-Sharia and sustainable development in the context of IIUM. And more importantly, he has mentioned that we are in the process of producing new knowledge, integrated knowledge for the entire humanity in the context of rahmatan lil alamin, as it has been mentioned in the Quran by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thank you, Tan Sri, once again for your presentation. With your permission, I now move on to our next panelist, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dr. Muhammad Kamal Hassan, former rector of IIUM. Born in 1942, Professor Emeritus Muhammad Kamal Hassan obtained his BA honors from University of Malaya in 1966 and his MA, MPhil and PhD from Columbia University in New York in 1970, 1973, and 1976, respectively. He was appointed as the third rector of the International Islamic University in Malaysia, IIUM, and served as first holder of the Malaysia Chair for Islam in Southeast Asia at the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. from 1997 to 1999, where he taught 2 postgraduate courses. His career as an academic administrator in IIUM began in 1983 and officially ended in 2017. However, Chancellor Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan has been appointed by the current rector of IIUM, Chancellor DZULKIFLI, as an honorary advisor to the Center for Islamization, CENTRIS, and continues thereby to contribute intellectually and academically towards the betterment of IIUM staff and students. With this brief CV, may I respectfully call upon Chancellor Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan to deliver his presentation. فليتفضل Chancellor Professor.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My dear colleague, Prof. THAMEEM Usama, the moderator, our dear rector, Chancellor Zulkifli Abdul Razak, my other colleagues, Professor ABDELAZIZ BERGHOUT, Professor AZYUMARDI AZRA, the rector of UIN Jakarta, our younger brother in Singapore, Professor Dr KHAIRUDIN, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, it gives me great pleasure indeed to be in this panel, and I have prepared something with the title Islamic Thought and Sustainable Development, some personal reflections. I have 20 minutes, so I'll rush through what I have written so far, but I'm grateful to Prof. Chancellor Zul for emphasizing the importance of the Islamic Maqasidic reference. I think that's a very, very important matter that has to be first understood by Muslims and then hopefully understood and accepted and inshallah adopted by our non-Muslim brothers and sisters. I have divided my writing here into about 7 parts. I'll see if I can squeeze all that within the 20 minutes I have. Now, the introduction. In the latter part of the 20th century, Islamic reformist and renewal thought in Muslim countries has been, to a large extent, concerned with the meanings and implications of the ideologies of capitalism, socialism, progress, development, modernization and secularization, which were being peddled or championed by post-independence nationalist power holders, intellectuals, and secularized Muslim elites. In the beginning of the 21st century, Islamic reformist thought expanded and developed further the intellectual discourse on Islamic economics, and finance, holistic and integrated human and societal development based on the concept of holistic Islamic education, culture, and civilization. And I come to the second part of my paper, that is United Nations Agenda 2030 on SDGs and Muslim response.
You need to unmute that, Prof.
I'm so sorry. So thank you very much. The UN Agenda 2030, adopted by United Nations in 2015 and endorsed by all Muslim countries, alhamdulillah, including Malaysia, has generated generally positive response from Muslim scholars and institutions, albeit with some reservations with regard to the underlying metaphysical assumptions and some specific points. And one specific point relates to goal number 5, which is, entitled gender equality. I think or I would say many Muslim scholars and intellectuals prefer to use the term gender justice and empowerment to women. They have no problem at all. In fact, they are for empowerment because women have not been really given the power they deserve. And of course, all the oppressive treatment by male counterparts in Muslim and non-Muslim countries, something that all Muslim intellectuals are against. But equality and justice have two different meanings, and they prefer the term gender justice. Otherwise, they are very, very supportive. Then I would go to the definition of sustainable development, as we all know from the 1988 Brundtland's Commission, stating that SD means development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, I would like to offer humbly a fuller definition and connotations of SD that is in consonance with the Islamic monotheistic worldview of man, nature, and life, and the world in the following 3 paragraphs. I must apologize to Prof. Zul. This is all going to be very, very abstract, theoretical, because that's where I belong. I'm not a man on the ground like your good self. So, but we need to blend this realistic and idealistic dimension, the yin and yang. Tan Sri Zul represents yin. I hope I represent yang, and we are actually together. Okay, the first paragraph is sustainable development is a holistic. This is my humble definition. It's quite long. It's three paragraphs. Sustainable development is a holistic and multidimensional development effort that fulfills justly and ethically the needs, the spiritual being the most fundamental of human needs, of the present, without compromising the opportunities and abilities of future generations to meet their needs in accordance with the commandments, principles, and values given by the one and only creator, God, master, provider, administrator, and sustainer of the whole cosmos to mankind as his servants, who he has appointed to be his intellectually equipped and trustworthy vicegerents and moral stewards of his planet Earth, as well as the natural environment. Now, second paragraph, sustainability from an Islamic point of view means more than the ability to exist constantly, or the capacity of the biosphere to coexist harmoniously and in equilibrium with human civilization. The goals, the means, the tools, incentives, methods, and recommendations involved to attain integrated social, economic, and ecological sustainability have to be congruent with and acceptable to the divinely revealed norms and values of servitude, vicegerency, trustworthiness, justice, blah, 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 which Tan Sri Zul explained at great length under the auspices of the Maqasid Sharia. Congratulations to Tan Sri for that. Now, for development efforts to be truly sustainable, they also have to be in conformity with the 5, 6, or more fundamental objectives of the divine law, the Sharia, or the divine way and law. As such, Muslim individuals, societies, or nations are prohibited from sustaining anything that is forbidden, haram, bad, munkar, harmful, mafsada, unjust or cruel, zalim, wasteful, israf, or full of deception, ghurur. Now the last paragraph, when all the the aforementioned prerequisites are fulfilled, then the development efforts would earn the barakah. This is the theological terminology, which can be translated into blessings. But blessings and barakah really means the good things that perpetuate. If things don't perpetuate, they're not blessings. If they're just there for 5 years and then it's gone, it's not a blessing. Blessing is something that whose goodness is extended without end, if possible. And that is barakah. And then there is also tawfiq, a real success given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the owner of the universe, the owner of planet Earth. Now his servants and vicegerents need to know. The problem is the servants and the vicegerents do not know that they are actually vicegerents. Do not know and remember that all their development and civilizational building endeavors are directly answerable and accountable to him in this earthly existence and before him as the absolute judge on the day of judgment. And therefore they have to be constantly mindful of divine presence and guidance in their developmental efforts by taking the necessary precautions to comply with the provisions and objectives of the divine law so as to achieve the final goal of real success, well-being, felicity and happiness, which comes under the term al-falah, and ultimately divine pleasure, ridwanullah, in his paradise. Then I would like to mention that Muslim scholars, and I certainly acknowledge and appreciate the fact that some leaders and ministers and prime ministers of Malaysia, including of Muslim nations, including Malaysia, have had several international meetings of their own since the beginning of the 20th century in the context of the SDGs. Briefly, I can mention the first Islamic conference on environment ministers in Jeddah in 2002, the Islamic Declaration on Sustainable Development issued by Muslim ministers of the OIC held in Kazakhstan in 2012, and then the International Islamic Climate Change Symposium held in Istanbul in 2015, which came out with the Islamic Declaration on climate change. However, I feel that the leaders of Muslim countries, as Tan Sri mentioned earlier, that when he goes to the Muslim countries, then he lost his case. I would share that sentiment very much because our problem first is with our own nations, with our own countries, with our own leaders. So I would urge the elites, the decision-making elites, the power holders in Muslim countries to read the good writings by Muslim scholars, beginning with, let's say, Muhammad Ansari in 1994, Islamic Perspective on Sustainable Development in 1994, and then S.M. Abdul Rahman in 2012, Integrating the Spiritual Dimension in Sustainable Development Strategy, then A.R. Darya in 2016, A New Approach for Sustainable Development Goals in Islamic Perspective, and our own group of scholars from KAIRUDIN in 2016, Azila, Alias, and Norima, they came up with the concept of sustainability from the Islamic perspectives, and a very good article by Professor Hashim Kamali in 2019, Islam and Sustainable Development. There's also the good article of Iyad Abu Maghli, Islamic Principles on Sustainable Development in 2019, also by Muhammad Zuhdi Marzuki, Religious Agendas Towards Sustainable Development, Islamic Perspective. And then very good also piece by Junaid Qadir and Azad Zaman in 2018 on sustainable development viewed from the lens of Islam. But to me, the best book so far that I had gone through is written by Professor Oda Rashid Al-Juyusi in 2012, 5 years before Agenda 2030 adopted by UN. It's called Islam and Sustainable Development, New Worldviews. This is a wonderful work written not by an armchair academic like myself, but someone who is really on the ground, bringing about transformative programs in Jordan, Syria, and for more than, I think, 30 years, he was involved in bringing about changes, environmental changes in sub-Saharan nations. And I would strongly urge our scholars to read this book of Al-Juyusi, because he has gone back and extracted from the Quran and the Sunnah the key concepts of Umran, of Zuhud, of Khilafah, and also several other concepts with Arabic, like also fasad, how to avoid fasad, and also social capital. He uses the term arham for social capital, and then using the concept of hayah tayyiba in the Quran, the good life, and also the construction of the earth, imaratul ard. So I would strongly urge that we read his book. Now, I would also like to mention that Muslim economies have also been trying to relate the great potential of Islamic finance and banking to overcome some of the, to reach the goals of SDGs. And one can add the potential of waqf and sadaqah, you know, as those of the Islamic tools to bring about the SDGs in line with Islamic worldview. I would like to also mention some of the critiques regarding SDG, and there are several critiques regarding SDG. One is one critique that I find very, very profound is by a Swedish professor, Ranjula Bali-Swain, 2017, a critical analysis of SDGs. Another one is by an Australian professor, Nigel Howard. I think I don't want to go into the critiques because I would like to just be concerned with the positive part and then the need for the Islamic perspective to be, you know, to reformulate the idea and not just to cut and paste or just, you know, meddling with some aspects of SDGs. I think the better Islamic approach is to look at all this issue of development and sustainability from the worldview of the Quran. So the Quranic paradigm of development acknowledges the creator sustainer as the owner and master of human beings, cosmos and nature, and defines the meaning of sustainability of the environment, planet Earth, and human civilization, which is not the same or congruent with the secular or agnostic or atheistic paradigms of contemporary societies, nations, businesses, and civil societies. Now, I would like to say that the most glaring omission and weakness of the SDGs, in my humble view, is the absence of recognition of the importance of spiritual dimension and meaning of human life, the world, and nature. We believe that the acknowledgement of spirituality and religious values in sustainable development should be made the philosophical or physical, a metaphysical foundation of SDGs. We propose that different religious or faith communities should be allowed to define the meaning of spirituality or the religious dimensions in accordance with their own religious beliefs or worldviews. The Buddhists can have their own, understanding and formulation of spirituality from a Buddhist worldview, which does not include theism. Viewing and analyzing the unprecedented crisis and the seriousness of the peril the world and the whole planet Earth since the beginning of the 20th century, from the worldview of the Quran, Islamic reformist thought argues for a fundamental re-examination of the secular, humanistic, agnostic, materialistic, naturalistic, mechanistic, utilitarian, or capitalist worldviews which underpin the dominant ideology of development and progress, notwithstanding the important critical contributions of economists such as Amartya Sen and the critical analysis of so-called heterodox economists regarding poverty, development, and equality. I hope Prof. THAMEEM, as the moderator, would alert me as soon as I have only 5 minutes left, so that I can rush through. Prof. THAMEEM, are you there?
You can have another 5 minutes, Prof.
Sorry?
Another 5 minutes, please.
And that, okay, all right. Okay, good. I have another 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, now looking at the Muslim communities now, this is my main problem. Just as Tan Sri Rector said, you know, the main hurdle is that Muslim countries are posing the hurdles to achieving this holistic and comprehensive development. Looking at Muslim communities and nation states, we have to admit that they have contributed a great share of the emergence of global crisis, not by denial of the existence or presence of God, but by the failure of the political, social, and professional leaders and elites to live by the worldview of the Quran. Second, their failure to lead or to inspire the masses on the basis of good governance, good management, good character, or good holistic education. The entrenched culture of abuse of power, status, authority, bribery, fraud and corruption, cronyism, collusion, and now kleptocracy in political, business, and dimensions, and the lower standards of education, scientific knowledge, and research have become the way of life of many Muslim countries. Not Islam as the way of life, but these entrenched culture of abuse of power and corruption is the way of life of many Muslim countries and the way of life of many Muslim leaders, plus political and economic hypocrisy. Another general feature of Muslim countries and culture is that the religion of Islam is largely understood and practiced by the masses as a collection of religious rituals. And therefore, spirituality is also misunderstood and is also only tied to certain people with certain features, physical features, and those people are able to work out some magic stuff, and then that's where the core of spirituality resides according to the masses. In our proposition that spirituality becomes the metaphysical foundation of the SDGs, that's of course my personal stand, we appeal first to all the 57 member states of OIC to implement it. Because as Muslim countries, that is to say, to bring spirituality as a basis of nation states' development strategies, because as Muslim countries and nations, they ought to provide the examples of the Islamic spiritual paradigm of sustainable development. Unfortunately, most Muslim countries do not represent the true teachings of Islam, let alone understand the Islamic perspective of development. Muslim political leaders and decision makers should be reminded that in the worldview of absolute and uncompromising monotheism of the Quran, the doctrine of the hereafter, al-akhirah, is the second most important. Sorry? Okay. Is the second most important doctrinal belief in Islam. And I come to the last sentence. It is only on the day of judgment. Oh, sorry. My last sentence is going to be in the conclusion, and I'm coming to the conclusion part of it. But before that, I wrote something about the responsibility of Muslim nationalist leaders to seek guidance from divine revelation. Then I come to the debate on the imminent collapse of modern contemporary. This is one area of the debate where I'm not going to discuss now, but Islamic thought will have to address this debate on the imminent collapse of modern civilization, despite the SDGs and what have you. And some of them are already predicting by 2050, modern civilization will collapse. But we, IIUM, we want to go beyond that to 2077. So hopefully we'll survive the collapse. In the conclusion, in light of the religious worldview of Islamic monotheism and its theomorphic conception of man, Islamic reformist and transformationist thought has always regarded the spiritual ethical dimensions of holistic, integrated, and balanced educational and civilizational development as the most crucial dimensions of real well-being, real growth, and real progress of mankind. Of course, this is also implied and embedded in the 7 mission statements of IIUM. But its greatest challenge today is to how to induce and persuade Western-oriented Muslim political leaders and conventional-minded Muslim elites to switch to the Islamic paradigm of holistic, comprehensive, balanced, and integrated development of human beings. Perhaps one of the positive lessons of COVID-19 pandemic to Muslim nationalist leaders is the necessity, nay, urgency, to be intellectually, economically, politically, technologically, and culturally liberated from the spiritually bankrupt systems and secularist mental frames of soulless, homocentric modernity and the delusions, ghurur, of so-called progress or development. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Kamal Hassan, for your remarkable presentation on Islamic thought and sustainable development. Alhamdulillah, we have benefited a lot from his presentation, and probably we have many questions at the end, and hopefully our speakers will be able to answer. And before I proceed to the next panelist, I would like to request my colleagues who are now with us to inform their friends to follow this program through YouTube as well as Facebook, because this system can only accept 300, which is the maximum. We have 300 participants are in this system now. So people are asking for entry, they cannot enter. So please advertise through your network, let them follow the program, which is live telecast through Facebook as well as YouTube. Thank you very much. Prof. Kamal, thank you very much for your presentation once again.
My pleasure, thank you.
We now move on to the next panelist, who is Professor Dr. AZYUMARDI AZRA, former rector of the Islamic State University. Born on March 4, 1955, Professor AZYUMARDI is a professor of history and culture and special staff to Vice President Joseph Kalla since January 2017. He was Director of Graduate School, Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta, Indonesia, January 2007 to March 2015, and was also Deputy for Social Welfare at the Office of Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia from April 2007 to October 2009. He was also Rector of Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University for 2 terms. He earned his MA in Middle Eastern Studies, MPhil and PhD degrees in History from Columbia University in the city of New York in 1992, with the dissertation, The Transmission of Islamic Reformism to Indonesia, Networks of Middle Eastern and Malay Indonesian Ulama in the 17th and 18th centuries. In May 2005, he was awarded doctoral degree from Carroll College, Montana, UIC. He was fellow at Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, an honorary professorial fellow, University of Melbourne, Australia in 2004 to 2009. He has been involved as a committee member of selection committees for research awards. He has been international visiting fellow at Al-Azhar University, Cairo, Leiden University, Oxford University, University of Philippines, New York University, Columbia University, University of Melbourne, and many others. He regularly presented papers on various subjects at national and international conferences. He has published 36 books, numerous chapters in internationally edited books. He will be focusing on Islamic thought and sustainable development and Indonesian experience. May I now respectfully invite Professor Dr. Azumardi to deliver his presentation.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin wa bihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya waddin. Wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajmain amma ba'd. Tan Sri Professors, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to Professor THAMEEM, who invited me, also Professor Imtiaz Yusuf, for inviting me. Actually, I submitted PowerPoints, but I cannot do it from here. So I'm going to deliver my presentation only orally. First of all, if we talk about Islam and Islamic thought and sustainable development, I think we have to admit that, as Professor Kamal Hassan just mentioned, that there is a lot of problem in most of Muslim countries. Because why? Because most of the Muslim countries left behind in terms of development, left behind or backward in terms of development. Particularly, I think in the last, with the COVID-19, I think there is no development. There is a lot of decline of social welfare or economic development, social development. In fact, a good number of Muslim countries are the poorest in the world. And it is unfortunate that these Muslim countries have been inflicted by war, internal war, like what we have now in Yemen in the last few years. Hundreds of thousands children and also children and other adults were killed in the war. That's really miserable. So only a handful Muslim countries are among emerging countries. I think including, of course, Malaysia, Indonesia. In fact, has been recognized as I think lower medium class, medium level country. Of course, Malaysia is better than Indonesia, but there are some other Muslim countries, but not in a very good position. Yeah. But no Muslim country included among the advanced economy. We are not advanced, not a first world country, not included yet. Even though some become members of major emerging country, including like Indonesia is one of the members of G20, yeah, with the I think number 12 in terms of GDP, yeah. And in fact, some of the so-called rich Muslim countries in the Middle East are too dependent on oil and gas. There is no diversification of economy. So this is what we have in the Middle East. In fact, some of these countries on the edge of oil curse. Because why? Because revenues from oil and gas have been used mostly for weaponry or for to also spend on military base, yeah? Military base in the Middle East in certain countries. So this is very, very sad. Yeah? So this is what I call as that these Muslim countries, the so-called, used to be rich, but now probably not too rich because they have a very serious deficit in terms of budget. Annual budget is very deficit. They have to borrow a lot of money. So this is what I call as the on the edge of oil curse. And these countries are not interested in SDGs program. If we have in Indonesia, for instance, there is a lot of SDGs problem related to the health of mother, of children, for instance, but there is no program from in SDGs program supported by a certain Middle Eastern or Arab countries. They are mostly interested in buying up, favorite football team, soccer team in Europe, like Manchester City or PSG or other, or building probably what is that, high-rise building in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi or even also in Saudi Arabia. So this is a very very sad. Yeah. Now, if we talk about under development that Islamic countries are behind, and then there are some causes of underdevelopment. The first one, of course, continuing internal conflicts in one single country or between or among group of Muslim countries. This is what we have now in much of Middle East. You can see this conflict in the Yemen or in Syria, in Iraq or in Libya, and to some extent also in Egypt. So this is very sad. How could you have a program, economic and social program, social development, if you are busy with conflict? And then the second is continuing authoritarianism in many countries, giving no room for civil society to play its role in development. Yeah. So this is what we have. The third page, please. So authoritarianism. Yeah. Authoritarianism in many of Muslim countries. And then also strong political, tribal, and religious sectarianism within one particular country and between several countries. In Indonesia, for instance, there have been conflicts among those who supported Wahhabism versus those who support because Indonesia is different from Malaysia. In Indonesia, Shiism is not banned, it's not considered deviant by the country, by the government. So, but you know, we have pro-CE leaders and also pro-Wahhabi leaders, some leaders, even though the number is pretty small, but they create a lot of problem. They create actually a proxy war in several places in Indonesia, even though I think it's quite some time ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, in Madura and also in East Java. There is some kind of proxy war between pro-CE, pro-Wahhabi group and pro-CE groups in the country, in Indonesia. So next page, please. And then strong political and tribal sectarianism, I already said about that. And then you have also, of course, traces of European colonialism that is now continuing with the interference of major power. I don't know in Malaysia, but in Indonesia, you can still have, you know, traces of Dutch colonialism in Indonesian economy. If you talk about, you know, big gap between the so-called people of Chinese origin and the so-called pribumi in Indonesia, indigenous Indonesian or indigenous people, I think this is because of the fact that the pribumi or bumi putra in Malaysia, you call it bumi putra, were actually left behind during colonialism, and then of course the Chinese were used by the Dutch colonials to actually basically to exploit the pribumi or the bumi putra, creating some kind of what I call as you know, structural violence, structural economic violence, actually, that we can still have it, can still feel it up until now. This is the problem, yeah. But some other countries, Muslim countries, of course, have never been colonialized, yeah. Many of them, but still they have a problem with major political power and economic power in the country, in the Middle East. Of course, US and now China have, and also Russia, have influenced, have dictated, you know, development or also created conflict in the Middle East, among the Muslim country in the Middle East. Next. Next, please. Now, there is a lot of misperception about Islam and development. That what is that? Why Muslim behind? I think because of, please, the page before this. Certain teachings of Islam regarded as obstacle to development, including of course some Muslim also believe that certain teaching of Islam is regarded as obstacle to development. So we need, I think we need to reform this kind of understanding among Muslim, or we need to, you know, to clear this perception among the people, among outsider. And also among Muslim, there is a strong emphasis of life in the after, the hereafter, rather than worldly life. So strong orientation on to hereafter. If we attend, you know, Jum'ah khutbah, many khutbahs during Jum'ah prayer. Actually, the sermon giver, you know, put a strong emphasis on the hereafter rather than how to have a good life at the same time in the world. And then also we have the predominant theology of predestination of Ash'arite, Jabariyah, Ash'ariyah and Jabariyah. And many Muslims are opposed to a more rational theology like Mu'tazilah. In fact, Mu'tazilah is considered as deviant, deviant teaching of Islamic theology. And then people also talk about the strong influence of tasawwuf or Sufism with strong orientation of asceticism. Yeah. Of course, not all of this, not all tasawwuf, bring Muslim to asceticism. Yeah, but in my study, we can also find what I call as neo-Sufism. Yeah. Sufism that is very active rather than passive, yeah, in worldly life. And then people also talk about low work ethic to pursue better worldly life. I already mentioned earlier. I think this is also related. Yeah? And then much spending on religious obligations such as obligatory alms or zakah, Hajj pilgrimage that inhibit accumulation of capital or wealth. And that, of course, there is a lot of discussion about this, yeah, about whether paying zakah or doing Hajj pilgrimage will inhibit economic development. I don't think that this is really true. And next. And then if we talk about Islam and sustainable development, of course, Islamic concept of sustainable development is basically theocentric, not anthropocentric, meaning not only for human being, not only for the benefit of human being, but we need to also to take consideration the theocentric aspect of development, sustainable development. And this is because why human being was created as vicegerent or khalifah on earth in order to develop it to achieve prosperity. Inni ja'ilum fil ardi khalifah. This is about the creation of khalifah, human being as khalifah to create prosperity. But at the same time, human being is created to perform ibadah. Worshipping Allah through obligatory rituals, ibadah mahdoh, and good deeds or amal salih in all aspects of daily life. This is the problem also among Muslim. There is some kind of separation between ibadah mahdoh, obligatory rituals, and good deeds in daily life. Some Muslim feel that there is no relation between what you are doing. Like for instance, if you search for knowledge, and then the search for knowledge is not considered as ibadah. It is considered as a worldly deed rather than religious deed. And then next, prosperity should for greatest benefit of human being, not limited for Muslim only. Next. Next, please. Now, development should create balance in economy, social, and before you have to return to the please return to previous
slide.
Yes, should create balance in economy, social environment, and then of course and overcoming imbalance and equality. This is also a problem in many Muslim countries, including of course Indonesia. In Indonesia, Gini ratio is very high. Economic imbalance in Indonesia is very high. I think third only after Russia and Thailand. So it's really really a problem, serious problem about this. And then all natural resources are provided by Allah for benefit of all human beings. All benefit, using it for destruction, for israf or fasad, creating fasad. Not only fasad in human life, but also in environment, like what we see now in the Yemen or also in Libya, for instance. All natural resources and revenues coming from them should be used to create equality and justice among people. And then development should preserve environment and ecosystem in order to sustain the decent life of human being. Next, I think I'm almost finished with that. I think so. What we need now, with this all very serious problem, I think Professor Kamal Hassan has already mentioned about the need for political reform, the need for social, the need for the reform of Islamic thought. And also the need for reform for Islamic practices. We are always behind in terms of Islamicity. If we relate this to SDGs, this is very sad. For instance, the highest ranking of Islamicity not in Muslim countries, among Muslim countries, but in fact countries like New Zealand or Scandinavian or Japan, in terms of, let's say, for the respect for environment, cleanliness of environment, protection of environment or something like that. So this is related to what I said before about the separation between the mosque and mosque and market. We pray in the mosque, but we forget Allah when we are in the mosque, when we are probably on the bank of river. We throw all of the all the garbage to the river, particularly in Indonesia. I don't know in Malaysia, but I'm sure in Malaysia you have a cleaner river. But in Indonesia, in Jakarta, for instance, people throw away all the garbage to the river. I believe that most of these people are Muslim because absolute majority of Indonesian population is Muslim. So it can be expected that the people who are responsible for throwing all this garbage to the river are Muslim. So this is very sad. So we need multi-level reform, multi-level reform from Islamic thought to Islamic practices to political and also to economic. I think I should stop here. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor, for your enlightened presentation on Islam and sustainable development from the Indonesian perspective. You have quoted a number of Quranic verses supporting individual SDG goals. Inshallah, we come to the next speaker, who is Associate Professor Dr. KHAIRUDIN Al-Junaid.
No, Aziz?
He requested. Dr. KHAIRUDIN Junaid is an Associate Professor at the National University of Singapore and Senior Fellow, previously Malaysia Chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, Georgetown University. He is the author of a number of books. Among the recent ones are Colonialism, Violence and Muslims in Southeast Asia, the Maria Hertog Controversy and its Aftermath, published by Routledge in 2009, Radicals, Resistance and Protest in Colonial Malaya, published by Northern Illinois University Press in 2016. Muslim Cosmopolitanism, Southeast Asian Islam in Comparative Perspective, published by Edinburgh University Press. Hamka and Islam, Cosmopolitan Reform in Malaya World, Cornell University Press in 2018. And Islam in Malaya and Entwin History, published by Oxford University Press in 2019. His research covers topics such as religious cosmopolitanism, social movements, and intellectual history. He is currently writing his new book entitled Shapers of Islam in Southeast Asia, which will be published by Oxford University Press, New York in 2021. With this, may I respectfully invite Associate Professor Dr. KHAIRUDIN Al-Junaid, and he will be delivering his presentation on 5 Muslim minds for sustainable future. فليتفضل Professor. Anything?
Perhaps he's unmute.
Yes, yes.
He unmute. Perhaps you can ask him to unmute.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me for this very important international webinar. I am probably the youngest in the lot, and a friend of mine highlighted to me that not only am I 20 years younger than all of the speakers of this session, I'm not even a full professor, and I'm not even a rector before of any university. So I am currently basically side by side, hoping to stand on the shoulders of giants. And it is an honor to be part and parcel of this session. And also, I'm sorry to say that I am going first than Professor Abdul Aziz, and I think he deserves actually to be the speaker before me. Please forgive me for going first, Prof. I hope that little sharing that I'm going to do today will benefit all of the participants that are listening in. What I'm going to talk about is somewhat and will echo some of the issues that have been brought up by Professor Kamal Hassan and also Professor AZYUMARDI AZRA. And I'm sure Professor Abdul Aziz will also speak about some of these issues. We have heard a lot about the problems of sustainable development in the Muslim world. And we have heard a lot about some of the approaches that have been taken by many of the intellectuals as well as people on the ground on how to maintain a sustainable future for Islam and for the Islamic world. I want to shift the attention a little bit today to look at how Muslims have thought about sustainable development and how this has impacted the Muslim world right now. So what I want to do today is to try to propose some kinds or some ways of thinking about Islam and about sustainable development for us to change the conditions of Muslims all over the world. And through this, I hope to initiate a kind of intellectual movement through IIUM with the help of all other universities that are involved today. And I hope that we will together initiate a paradigm shift in the Muslim world on how we are approaching the environment and societies that we are living in. So take my presentation today as a thought in action presentation and not only an attempt to theorize and explain what is happening in the Muslim world. Take note that I come from Singapore, a Muslim, a country where Muslims are minorities. So I don't have the liberty to comment too much about people who are from majority countries, but I hope that being small in size and also in terms of experience can help to illuminate some of the problems that are faced by Muslims elsewhere. So what I want to do today is I'm going to go on 3 directions. The first is I'm going to talk about what Professor Kamal Hassan has spoken about just now. How do we actually measure sustainable development, and what are some of the problems of all of these measurements and criteria that have been put forth? Professor Azra has also talked about it just now. I want to emphasize on certain points. Secondly, I want to talk about the Muslim world. And here, whenever we talk about the Muslim world, and I like it that the professors before us have been very honest about what's happening to the Muslim world, I'm going to push that level of honesty to the very extreme, if possible, and try to be as brutally honest as possible about what's happening to us right now, why we are such a problem to the world and to ourselves, and what we need to do to change this. And then the last step I'm going to take is to talk about the 5 Muslim minds that we need to nurture, we need to develop, we need to talk about, and we need to practicalize for us to have a sustainable future, not only now, but also many generations to come. And then we're going to have our questions and answers. I will stick to the 20-minute time limit that I have. So let's begin first by talking about the measurement of sustainable development. Today, our keynote speaker has spoken about the sustainable development goals that have been given to us by the UN. And I think these sustainable SDGs that have been offered to the world is something that is notable and something that we need to look at very, very seriously. If you look at all of the 17 goals and the state of the Muslim world, very few Muslim countries have actually achieved these 17 goals. But there are problems with the sustainable development goals that are given by the UN. And among the problems is that we have many missing dimensions within these goals that have actually caused the recurrence of certain problems that we see in many parts of the world. We don't have within these goals a measurement of the state of morality in many countries all over the world. Hence, we have Western countries and even Islamic countries that may be very advanced in terms of technology, in terms of income equality, in terms of eradication of poverty, in terms of infrastructures, in terms of institutions, in terms of how it has managed many aspects of life in that country, but we have declining morality. And we don't have to go far, travel into any European, North American, and even Islamic countries that we see endemic corruption, we see problems of cheating all the way up in the level of governments to all the way down in the level of society. Whenever I go to Indonesia, the joke that has always been told to me by fellow Indonesians has always been that the level of iman of the people, the level of iman of road sweeper in Singapore is higher than the level of iman of some of the most powerful scholars in Indonesia. And then when I ask a fellow Indonesian, why does he say that? He would tell me that the road sweeper in Singapore is afraid of corruption. But someone who's trained in Islamic studies or who is educated in Indonesia may not be afraid of that. And this is the problem that we have. So morality is not measured. And secondly, family life is missing in the SDGs that have been offered to us. And the reason is because the world has shifted in terms of its conception of the importance of the family. So you have countries that are very, very much developed, but family life has been breaking down. We have now strange formulations of what families are, and we have a problem of high divorce in many developed countries, so much so that it has led to also moral degeneration. And last but not least, as Professor Kamal Hassan and also Professor Azra has already mentioned, religious values are not even factored into the SDGs. It is almost as if religion don't exist as part and parcel of UN's consideration, when the reality of the statistics out there, if you look at the studies that have done by Pew, religion factors in so greatly in many countries all over the world. Out of the 100+ countries that we have, more than 3/4 of the countries all over the world still cherish religion as a defining factor of how they see themselves. So you have big problems in how the SDG has been formulated. A counter argument to that is that the SDGs do not need to include these 3 factors that I have put here on the PowerPoint slide because all of these factors are somehow implied. My response to that is that why must it be implied? Why can't these factors become the center stage of what the SDGs are supposed to be? Because if we are really seriously talking about sustainable development, we should talk seriously about the state of public morality and personal morality, the state of families in societies all over the world, and also the state of religiosity that shapes families and moralities all over the world. So I want to just push forth the point that the SDGs do not give us an enough or sufficient enough measurement of how should we actually look at sustainable development. And that leads us now to the Muslim world. Now we know that in Islam, moral values is basically at the peak of what being a Muslim is all about. That religion, of course, religious values are part and parcel of what being a Muslim is all about, and that family forms the core unit of an Islamic or a flourishing Islamic society. Do Muslims actually value these three sustainable development goals that have been neglected by the UN? The reality is such that they do not. And here I want to put forth the first statistics, which is on Muslims in the UK. We would expect that Muslims in the UK would be the more advanced societies than as compared to all over the world. But the reality of the situation in the UK is such that the poorest people in the UK are actually the Muslims. And they are the Pakistanis and the Bangladeshis that are based there. Of course, we can include people coming from the African countries. And right now, we have people, refugees coming from the Middle East. They form the largest bulk of people who are the poorest in all of these developed countries, be it the UK, Germany, Sweden, and so forth and so forth. And the poverty that you see among Muslims in the West, in the developed West, is actually a microcosm of the poverty that you see all over the Muslim world. Let's face it, the statistics that have been produced even by Muslim scholars tell us that 35% of the 2 billion people that you see all over the world are now residing in Muslim majority countries. So we are in a kind of a double bind. As minorities, we are poor, and we don't have to go far. We can look at some of the ASEAN countries where Muslims are minorities, like Timor-Leste, for example, and Cambodia and Vietnam and so forth. But even as Muslim majority countries, we are amongst the poorest in the world. So even if we want to measure from the perspective of the UN and take away morality and family life and religious values away, Muslims are not doing well in those sectors. The Global Peace Index that we have, that have been developed, of course, we can argue that these indexes are very much Eurocentric, but if you look at it from the perspective of objective criteria, only Malaysia is part and parcel of the top 20 countries that are seen as the most peaceful countries all over the world. The very top of this list, and Professor Azra actually alluded to that just now, are countries like Iceland, New Zealand, Portugal, Austria, Denmark, Canada, Singapore, Czech Republic, and so forth. We are living basically right now in a conflict-ridden Muslim world. And this is the sad reality. Many studies have been done about this. One study that has just been published a few years ago in the journal Research and Politics asked the basic questions: are Muslim countries more prone to violence? The authors actually concluded that they are not, and that by pure statistics, it is actually clearly shown that Muslims are not predisposed to violence. But this violence that you see in the Muslim world are usually state-sponsored violence or violence that are resultant from other problems that are in that society. And the big problem in the Muslim society all over the world is the problem of class divisions and socio-economic disparities. And of course, if you look at all other statistics, some Muslims that I've spoken to will argue, oh yeah, you know, we Muslim countries may be very poor, we may have poverty, we may have violence, but you know, we still value our own lives. Muslims do not kill themselves. Well, the reality is not as such. If you look at the statistics on suicide, whether Muslims actually value their lives, among the highest suicides are found in countries like Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan is the fourth highest, has the fourth highest suicide rates all over the world. If you look at other countries in the list, number 90 is Turkmenistan, and then you have Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and others. So most of the Central Asian countries are majority Muslim countries, and they suffer from high levels of suicides. The COVID pandemic has shown that the strength of faith is so important in ensuring that suicides don't happen. In Malaysia, and I've read reports, as well as in Indonesia and other parts of ASEAN countries, suicides are on the increase, even among Muslims, as a result of the inability to cope with some of the stresses of COVID and also problems of family life. So we have all of these problems in the Muslim world. We have a lot of issues that needs to be addressed, both from the SDG and supra SDG perspective. My question would be, how do we change this? Now, there is no magic pill to solve all of these problems of development and all of this problem of the ability to ensure sustainable development. I do not want to get into too many examples because it makes us very depressed. When I was visiting one Muslim country, and I should not mention where it is, one person, a guide who brought me around to the major mosque in that country, told me that one of the easiest ways to identify the mosque amidst all the other buildings in that community is to smell where the mosque is. When you smell something bad, that is where the mosque is going to be located. And this is the sad reality of some of our Muslim countries. The dirtiest places are sadly the places of worship. What is the problem here? The problem here to me is actually the crisis of the mind. And this is actually the project of IIUM when it first began. And we need to bring back this project of the reformation of the Muslim mind to ensure a sustainable future for the Islamic world. And I am very much inspired by the book of Howard Gardner, and I fully encourage all of the people who are listening today to read this book. I disagree with many of his conclusions in the book, but what is very notable about this book is that Howard Gardner is saying that we need not only analyze the problems of the present, but we need to prescribe some solutions for the future by transforming the minds of the people out there. And this is what we need. We need to transform Muslim minds in order for Muslims to prepare for the future. I am saying that there are 5 Muslim minds, and here taking from Howard Gardner, that we need to develop. The first Muslim mind that we need to develop is a law-abiding mind. One of the big problems that we have in the Muslim world is that we have a lot of laws, but we have people who do not follow the laws. And we don't have to give examples on this. The issues of corruption, the issues of homicides, and so forth are all caused by Muslims not being able to follow the laws that is out there. And the infringement of laws, be it at the smallest level, at the everyday level, to the level of the state, has resulted to the lack of state's ability to ensure sustainable development. And this is where Prof. Kamal Hassan just now mentioned about the writing by Professor Hashim Kamali. I would like to draw everyone's attention to one of his papers, which is called The Actualization, Taf'il, of the Higher Purposes of Maqasid Sharia. I think we should move from talking about Maqasid Sharia to looking at how we can put it to practice. How we can ensure that the societies out there, the Muslims out there, not only know the Maqasid Sharia, not only know the laws of Islam, the Sharia of Islam, but implement it in their daily lives. To be in fear of infringing the laws is our first step to ensuring a sustainable future. To fear throwing rubbish on the ground and not throwing it into the garbage bin is the basic micro thing that we need to teach every single Muslim child. So this law-abiding mind, the ability to follow the law, is to me the first mind that we need to develop in the future. If we can train someone to ensure that after he has used the toilet, he would clean it so that the next person that comes in would have a clean toilet, we can change the world. And I always say this everywhere I go, that if we can ensure that the dirtiest place in where we are is the cleanest place, like the Japanese, we can go a long way. Go to Japan, go to Korea, and go to their toilets and you see clean toilets. But we cannot do that because we do not know how, and our minds are not trained to ensure that laws, not only laws as in the country's laws, not only laws as in the state laws, but the laws of society, the laws of nature are abided to. So this is the first, the law-abiding mind. The second mind that we need to develop in the Muslim world is the conservationist mind. The mind that conserves things around them, that do not destroy things. If you look at many Muslim countries out there, one of those things, and if anyone has traveled to Egypt and many parts of the Arab world, one of those things that we observe in many of this Arab world is the abundance of vandalism everywhere you go. People vandalize things because they do not want to conserve their environment. And the conservationist mind is a mind that sees things in perpetuity. A mind that sees that if he or she destroys something, somebody else cannot benefit from that thing. And this is the mind that can be developed when a person is taught from the very beginning how the world around him or her is actually important not only to himself, but also for the generations to come. And when we talk about the conservationist mind, we're talking about the love for the environment, not only for the love of Islam, the love of oneself, to see that the environment is something that has to be conserved for the future of the generations to come. So that's the second mind, to see that everything has to be made sustainable, and that the little things that we do, such as throwing a pen that could be recycled anywhere, or buying things that could not be recycled, would have implications on the environment as a whole, can actually change the conditions that is out there. So that's the second. I hope that everybody is still with me. I'm moving at a F16 pace because I want to try and complete it in 20 minutes. The third mind that we need to develop is the humanitarian mind. Like it or not, murder, violence, conflict is actually part and parcel of the Islamic, or not Islamic, sorry, of the Muslim DNA. And this is the problem that we have right now. The highest, the most, in a sense, violence that has the most impact on society are actually violence that are happening in the Muslim world. We do not need to cite examples. The state of Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan tells us that Muslims right now lack the humanitarian conscience. So I would like to direct everyone's attention to this book by W.R. Smisser, where he talks about the inability of the modern man to understand that he or she has the responsibility to preserve another human's life. And because Muslims have forgotten this tradition of theirs, they are very much involved in the humanitarian crisis that is happening right now in the Muslim world. And when we talk about Islamic thought, the Quran is very clear about this issue, that if anyone kill a person not in retaliation of murder and to spread mischief on land, it would be as if he killed all of mankind. And if anyone saved alive, it would be as if he saved all of mankind. We need to develop minds that think about how we can save other people's minds. And this would encourage innovations that would ensure that new products are formed, so much so that people's lives will be preserved by it. One of those things that I've been thinking about lately is actually handphones. These handphones may be helping us to improve communications all over the world, but it has shortened our mortality. Many studies have shown that people are now dying in their sleep, right? And the reason has to do partly because of technological overdose. Young people, be in Singapore or other places, they're just dying, sudden death. They don't wake up the next morning because they've been using the phones, the technologies endlessly. How can now we Muslims think about new technologies that do not make us addicted to devices, but able to communicate in ways that recover our sense of humanity. It is quite clear that what the handphones have done to us is to dehumanize us. We even talk to our families, we chat with our families at homes through WhatsApp, Twitter, and others. And this is a sad reality. You go for dinners, you go for lunches, the humanity, the humanitarianness is already gone. Everybody's hooked onto the handphone. So we need to think, how do we actually recover this humanitarian mind to recover our sense of humanity? And the next mind that we need to build is an ethical mind, a mind that thinks about ethics, on how we can carry ourselves in the ways in which Islam teaches us to be exemplars in society, to do things that are ethical and not only by way of achieving instrumental ends. And this is a message to all of the scholars that are listening right now. We have a corrosion of ethics in the academe. And that's why we have a crisis throughout the Muslim world of thought. Right now, and I hear this a lot from friends all over the world, the chase is for Scopus, ISI, all of these matrices that are actually not helping in intellectual development. In the pursuit of all of these metrics that we are so in love with, Muslim scholars have become unethical beings. We have people taking the works of others without acknowledging, basically exploiting students and staff just to rise up all of these rankings that we have out there. We need to change this. We need to resist many of these developments that are taking away the ethics that are with us. Take note that all of these ethics begin with scholars and it will be projected back into society. I would like to quote here Alija Azabagovich, who said that all power in the world starts out with moral firmness. Every defeat begins as moral failure. All that is desired to be accomplished must first be accomplished in the souls of men. That if we lose our ethical compass, if we lose our moral compass, we lose our standing in the world. Never mind if the world wants to use instrumentalist criteria to achieve their ends. Because to me, such successes are short-term. Any community that holds on to its ethics, and we see this amongst Muslims in the past, they will advance because their ethics become the compass by which they move. And last but not least, and I'm going to end here, I think, Prof, I only have 3 minutes left. We need to revive what I call as the reforming mind. The mind that is open to reform, that do not sit and be comfortable with traditions. If things need to change, change it. Do not hold on to things that do not help the community to progress. Make our environment nicer by improving our infrastructures and change the ways in which we think about Islam in order to move forward and to bring the whole Muslim world to a new direction. And this is where Hamka provides for me one example of someone who, during his time in the 1960s, were informing Muslims in Southeast Asia and beyond to try and bring together different ways of thought to come up with a new dynamic, a new way of thinking to push societies forward. And to have a reforming mind is to also have an inclusive mind, to read widely, to learn from the West and from Islam, and to fuse all of these ideas together to form new ideas for the future. I would like to give a little bit more attention to Professor Osman Bakar's book, which I think ought to be made a topic of discussion right now in the midst of this pandemic crisis. What has come forth to the world is the importance of science and medicine. Left unchecked, the science and medicines that have been offered and produced for the sake of humanity can somehow move to a direction that we do not want. And this is a direction that is, as I said just now, more materialistic driven and instrumentalist in nature. We need to bring back discussions about the Islamic philosophy of science, how Muslims can also conceptualize science and medicine in their own way, and through it give birth to new vaccines, to new solutions to these problems of pandemic that do not transgress the whole being of a human being and would help the people out there who is suffering amidst of this pandemic to move forward and to enter into a new reality that is incongruent not only with Islam, but also the universal values of mankind. So these are the 5 Muslim minds that I hope that we will consider in our deliberations of how to ensure a sustainable future for the Muslim world. This list is not at all exhaustive, but I hope that it will provide some points of reflection for us to think about, and for IIUM, especially a university that I hold in very high esteem, to develop and to encourage the rise of institutes, centers, and research that could give birth to 5 Muslim minds for a sustainable future for Islam and mankind as a whole. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. KHAIRUDIN ALJUNIED, for your presentation, in which you have emphasized on 5 Muslim minds for sustainable future, which are extremely important for the Muslim Ummah of today to really keep in mind. One is law-abiding mind, conservationist mind, humanitarian mind, ethical mind, and reforming mind. Inshallah, we will have a few questions on this at the end of the session. Our last speaker is Professor Dr. ABDELAZIZ BERGHOUT, who is a former Deputy Rector, Internationalization and Global Network, IIUM, former Sheikh of the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, former Dean of Corporate Strategy and Quality Assurance, IIUM, member of the Board of Directors of the Center for Higher Education and Scientific Research Ethics, ISTAC, in collaboration with Amir Naif University. He is currently the member of that board. He serves as a professor of Islamic Studies and Civilization in the Kulliyah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences, International Islamic University, Malaysia. He has credit of publishing 11 books and 60 over scholarly articles in indexed and refereed journals locally and internationally. Professor Berghout received several awards locally and internationally. Among them, the Jewels of the Muslim World, OIC Today, and Organization Islamic Cooperation Malaysia International Award in 2019. Best Scientific Book Award, Social Sciences category, English Islamic Science University, Malaya in 2019. Award of Best Scholar and Contributor to Development of the Islamic World, International Moderation Forum, Jordan, 2019. Award for Dedicated Leadership and Services, IIUM Maulid Rasul Award in 2015. And Vicenium Appreciation Award, Ma'adin Academy, India in 2015. And lastly, Ajman Award for Quality and Excellence from the ruler of Ajman. Professor Dr. ABDELAZIZ BERGHOUT will be speaking on Islamic thought and sustainable development towards a comprehensive framework. فليتفضل Professor Dr. ABDELAZIZ BERGHOUT, the floor is now yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Prof. Zul, Prof. Kamal, and our respected colleagues, learned professors and doctors, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. As you see my situation, being the last speaker, you know, it's known that professors in general have the art of summarizing what has been said by all our learned professors and doctors. So brothers and sisters, bear with me. I will try to be more like raising issues and questions as we are talking about Islamic thought and sustainable development today. And I think our Professor Zul, in fact, has already summed up the priority and summed up the main important question that we should be asking. It's actually all regarding what can Islamic thought do, or what kind of a discourse that we need today to answer all these questions, whether question of development or sustainable development or any other questions. It's the dynamism of Islamic thought that can tell us the possible answers. So brothers and sisters, it's very important to, in this presentation, I'm trying to answer 3 questions. Question number 1, what are the priorities of Islamic thought? What is the priority now? Because we have Islamic thought, the early Islamic thought, the contemporary Islamic thought, and we'll talk about the current Islamic thought. Actually, what is our priority? Are we going to continue the way how we address things with the same approaches, the same methods, the same way and mentality of doing things, or there is a need to revisit the dynamism, the dynamics of Islamic thought itself in dealing with the reality in which we live today, which is global, which is complex, which is sensitive, which is the Ummah is in the lower level, and there is a dynamic civilization with its positivistic, postmodernist, and so on and so forth worldview. So what is the priority that the Islamic thought need to ask and to address? The second question, I would like to talk about what is the type of a paradigm or a model that is needed for us to address the question of development or sustainable development. The question is there, and the world is functioning and doing and working sustainable development, whether from a liberal perspective or from any other humanistic or environmental or any other perspective. So what is the Islamic input on this? What is the Islamic model on this? And then the other question, which I think is important, is how Quran helps us articulate this question of development. So brothers and sisters, the priorities, I'm sure that development, in the case of the Ummah today, development and civilization and civilizational development and sustainable development is a priority. So I don't see that there is a big issue to identify sustainable development, civilizational development as one of the main priorities of the Ummah, as we are trying our best to rebuild our civilizational capacities to activate or reactivate or in fact introduce Islamic civilization, which will actually answer or to be a response to our problems today. Now, the question of the Islamic contribution of Islamic thought to solving the problems of the Ummah, whether the internal or humanity problems, I think that's also a priority and we need to take it very seriously. So there is a question also when we deal with Islamic thought, and also we deal with sustainable development or development for that matter, there is an issue of the bigger picture, the bigger design, the strategic view of Islamic thought and its role and function in all this things which are happening. The issue of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary capacities and abilities, not only of the Muslim universities, but the Muslim scholars, the Muslim researchers. Are we able, if we are talking about Islam and the model of Islam as rahmatan lil alameen, as a model which is covering dunya and akhirah, and seen and unseen, and material and spiritual, so where are we in terms of our capacities and abilities of ijtihad to do this? Because sustainable development by its nature is a transdisciplinary kind of a model. it's a multidisciplinary kind of a model. So let me, based on this questions, I move forward. I don't want to go, I prepared few things, but I need just to raise issues and to see how we move forward in finding answers. Now, let's first understand the dynamics of Islamic thought and how Islamic thought has responded during the early times of Islamic civilization to its needs, to its questions, to its problems. So, brothers and sisters, I selected here 6 scholars to show you the strategic thinking or the system analysis thinking, which we are lacking today in many of our endeavors, where we start segmenting thought, concepts, ideas. So we lose that ability to synthesize and see the issues and problems from a multifactorial, from a synthetic and kind of a networking system analysis thought, so that we understand the phenomenon properly from all the perspective and aspect. I take the example of, I have 6 people here, 6 minds, as Brother Junaid, Dr. Junaid was talking about the minds. I give you the ta'sil of these minds in the Islamic thought and how they were dynamic in giving us many aspects of development. So, number 1, it is the project of Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyah of Al-Imam al-Mawardi. And the second one is the Ihya project of Imam al-Ghazali. The third one is the project of saving the Ummah in the time of critical contexts. It's Al-Imam al-Juwayni. The Umran project is Ibn Khaldun, the mind which talks exactly about civilizational development, about human association from a multifactorial approach, from the mind of a real Muslim mind that sees the universal and the particular, that understands that there is no application without theorization, without conceptualization, without internalization of thought, without creating the culture of synthesizing, strategizing. It's all going along the way of segmentation. And this is one of the diseases in our intellectual development. So the other one is Imam al-Shatibi, the Maqasid project, where he starts speaking about the sociology of Maqasid, the sociology of Sharia, the power or the social impact of Maqasid. Then I have one contemporary scholar who is Malik Bernaby, who also tried to use system analysis and thinking the system thinking to address the issues of the Ummah. Now, let me just go very quickly, as I have many things to tell you in these 20 minutes. Al-Mawardi project, he has articulated the question of development. Some of the good ideas that he was talking about, he's talking about religion as the guiding model or the guiding element of development, whether of individual, of government, of society. He's talking about strong leadership and governance. He's talking about comprehensive justice. He's talking about security and stability in society. He's talking about the importance of economic growth in a society. And surprisingly, Imam al-Mawardi was talking about one aspect of sustainable development, exactly how the people or the scholars of sustainability speaks about it today. He says in one of the paragraphs in his book, protection of the rights and needs of future generation. Not only the needs and the wants which are material, but he say also their hopes and their needs for amal. I move forward to the next model, which is a very sophisticated model of Al-Ghazali. And Al-Ghazali, as you know, he is one of the big scholars who started
early in our development of Islamic thought, talking about ihya, revivification, renewal. He posed the question of there is a big issue in Islamic thought, need to be addressed. And he provided his model. I tried to summarize it, the revival of ulum. If you see his book of Ihya Ulum al-Din, he talks about 4 big areas. Al-Ibadat, which is worship. Al-Adat, which is the social, the fiqh, the transaction, the economy, anything related to the life of people. Then he talks about Al-Muhlikat, the things which are predictions, destructive, like crimes, like corruption, like all this. And then he talks about Al-Munjiyat, how to solve. This is a systematic thought. This is a scholar who understands the theory and the practice. Then in this book, I singled out his focus on ilm, on tazkiyah, on maslaha and public interest, and on enjoining good and preventing evil. There are other 4 important aspects in his approach to development of the individual, of the self, of the society, which we need today, which he was talking about maqasid of worship, not only worship, rituals, salat, zakat, hajj, the maqasid, the asrar, means the impact of your maqasid, of your ilm, of your knowledge, of your action on people, on life. That's very important. He was talking about living and earning. Many people, they say Al-Ghazali is a mutasawwif, is only for spiritual, is only for akhlaq. No, he was talking comprehensively about his model of revivification, faith and divine remembrance and hereafter. I move forward so that I go to the Ash-Shatibi model, here where we talk about maqasid becoming a system of thought. And what is important in the maqasid or Ash-Shatibi model, not the maqasid al-Sharia per se, because it was there with Al-Ghazali, it was there with Al-Juwayni, it was there with others. What is important in the model of Al-Shatibi is the maqasid al-Mukallaf. He's talking about the human. We are talking about the Khalifa, the vicegerent, the family, the society, the ummah. Okay, maqasid sharia is what? Protect life, protect. But you as a mukallaf, what is your maqasid? Allah give you this sharia. Now, what is your maqasid towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, towards the sharia? Shatibi put it very nicely in one nice text. He says, the maqasid of the mukallaf is to free and liberate himself from his own desires and grips as a servant of Allah with his own choice, as he is a servant or abd of Allah without his choice. So Imam Shatibi talks about the impact of maqasid when we see it in the institutions, in life, in culture, in what we do, in all aspects. So the concept of maslaha important, the concept of ijtihad and creativity is important. In the model of Imam al-Shatibi, we need to talk about the social impact of the maqasid. We need to talk about the ethicality of Sharia, the ethical and the value and the practical aspect of Sharia. He talks about the reviving of ijtihad, and this is needed. He talks about the humanization of Islamic law. And I think this is very important, as Tansir Zul mentioned about humanization of humanizing education. Here we are talking about this concept from within the core of the maqasid al-Sharia. I move forward. As I go to the model of Ibn Khaldun, we come to a person who introduced Ilm al-Umran. And in Ilm al-Umran, Ibn Khaldun, if we are talking about civilizational development or sustainable development from an Islamic perspective, religion, important, human association, which is civilization, is important, state is important, dynamics of al-Asabiyya is important. I don't want to go into the details. So brothers and sisters, in the model of Ibn Khaldun, worldview, ethics, and values are important. Governance, economy, science, education, handcrafts, industries, business is very important. Ijtihad, competencies, and malakat are important. So with this view, we understand that when we talk from an Islamic perspective about sustainable development, there are many aspects. That's why Islamic thought need to regain back that, you know, what I said, the comprehensive approach of the concept of development. It's not only about maqasid, it's not only about akhlaq, it's not only about ijtihad, it's not only about creativity, but it's that whole that creates a new culture, a new human, that whose culture is the culture of istikhlaf. Istikhlaf is a very practical concept in Islam. Now, Malik Bernaby, another model who articulated the development of the question of development within the framework of civilizational development. He was talking about the importance of religion, human, man, soil, which is land, which is resources. He talks about society. He talks about the need of the material and spiritual balance. He talks about the importance of culture, social, education, ethics. According to Malik Bernaby, whatever theories you create, whatever epistemologies you create, if they don't translate into daily actions in any place, in any institution, and they reflect the simple values of Sharia, of Islam, like love, respect, unity, dynamism, efficiency, helping, brotherhood, let's say, not being a corrupt. He says that whatever models we put, they should in the end result into the character, one of the characters of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as the Quran says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, and also his Quran says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. This is the social radiation of ethics and values, not just for spiritual and ritual perspective. Now, I move forward. Professor Kamal mentioned about the Dr. Awad Al-Jiyusi, who is one of the scholars who wrote a book about sustainability. I summarized his model in this chart here. It talks about ijtihad, need for ijtihad and creativity and innovation. First, he talks about ihsan, society and relations inside the society, al-arham. The mizan, we need to have the scale, we need to have the measure, and worship tasbih. And then he speaks about maslaha, ijtihad, hikmah, and adl in articulating development, or for Islamic thought to address the question of thought. Now, I move forward after mentioning this. This shows that the Islamic thought was able before to develop a system analysis, a culture that synthesizes ideas and functions smoothly between the theory and the practice. In our case, because of decline, because of cultural problem, because of civilizational problem, because of what happened in our, specifically in culture, we got that ability to synthesize the theory and practice, and that this one, a disease, cannot be cured by theory, by knowledge. It will be cured only by a mind change, a cultural change, a new personality change, where education, culture, family, and all this play a role, and they are given precedence. Brothers and sisters, I move very quickly to tell you, in order to develop a model for sustainable development from an Islamic perspective, these are the things we need to, as Tansri Zul mentioned, when he speak about maqasid al-sharia, and he was talking about certain things which are not covered, like the environment, like the climate change. So brothers and sisters, I want you to look at the point of, we need to synergize between the maqasid of al-Quran and the maqasid of sharia. We need to synergize, because maqasid al-sharia at that time, they were meant to deal with specifically the maqasid, the individual. maqasid, you know, the individual, and then comes the societal. But now in our time, the societal becomes the dominating. So the maqasid al-sharia, for example, when we talk about wealth, not necessarily we talk about the wealth and the assets of the individual, the person, as in the cases of the fuqaha before. We talk about wealth. We can include here the assets which are tangible and non-tangible. We talk about the universe as an asset, as a wealth. We talk about the any type of wealth can be under the wealth. When we talk about the protection of intellect, we talk about everything. It means that we need to look at maqasid sharia as a model when we talk about. In fact, I have a different perspective about it, but I don't want to mention it here. But I'm just saying that the point of Prof. Zul is very important for the Islamic thought to take as a question to address. So brothers and sisters, the bigger picture will be like this. We have a tawheed, we have al-istikhlaf, we have al-ubudiyya, we have al-i'mar, which is the process of development, and we have al-umran, which is civilization itself. When it happens, then we have the idea of ummah as khayra ummah. We are a referral model. When we start building our civilization or thinking or thought, we should always eye that we are khayra ummah. We are wasatiyya ummah. We are not, the situation, the real now is not really what we want. But let's see. There, we look at the ideal first, and then see how and then comes al-falah. I move forward. I want to show you here the maqasid of the Quran can open for you more space and opportunity to develop a better sustainable development model from Islamic perspective, where we have here guidance, al-huda, al-umma, al-wasat, al-musawat, al-adl. Musawat means equality, takreem, justice, respect. We have hereafter. We have taskhir as a concept in Islam. Taskhir means you put to use the resources which God provided for you, but you must do few things. I will mention them shortly. The concept of hayatun tayyiba, desirable quality, that's the new worldview. The new discourse of the Islamic worldview should be centering about hayatun tayyibah, the desirable life which the Quran projects. And this actually surpasses the simple concepts which you hear today. The concept of istikhlaf and umran, the concept of prophethood, and so on and so forth. I move forward so that I will not keep you. Okay, I move here. Now, I'm proposing a simple model which speaks about vicegerent, which is Khalifatullah, but from the perspective of man, society, ummah, the world. I talk about environment, which is nature, resources, sunan Allah, and ayatullah. You don't take the universe just as the material, the physical. This is destructive. This creates dichotomy in the Muslim mind, because the model of environment in Islam, as I will explain shortly, integrates the spiritual and the moral within itself. Now, we got also the Umran Insani. When we do civilization, we do humanity civilization, humanizing education or civilization. So, Hayatun Tayyiba, this is the worldview we need to project. And here, in the first one here, I talk about taskhir and preservation, here tazkiyah, and here growth and development, whether economy or all aspects, and here we talk about quality of life. I move forward here. Brothers and sisters, there are many details here. I give you just one simple example. How Quran talks about hayatun tayyiba. You will be surprised to know that the Quran speaks about usrah tayyiba, family tayyiba. مجتمع طيب, society طيبة, country طيبة, بلد طيب, مساكن طيبة, houses طيبة or housing, knowledge طيبة, القول الطيب, العلم الطيب, الرزق الطيب, your rizq should be طيب. A lot of things are there. الأموال الطيبة, the amwal, the money which is طيب, the halal طيب. The aklun tayyib, the food which is tayyib. That's why halal industry. That's why we are working on halal. Al-insanu tayyib, the man who is tayyib. I don't want to explain this is also, I will escape the characteristics of this sustainability. I will escape this. This is a maqasid sustainable model from an Islamic perspective, which speaks about sustainability as a crucial, as one of the most important aspects and teachings of Islam. Brothers and sisters, yes, sustainability today, or the sustainable liberal model, has its, but if it is, what exists now comes from a liberal, this doesn't mean we should not engage it. We should not implement, we should not develop. We look at it from the Islamic thought perspective. So our sustainability should be there. Ethicality, tazkiyah, accountability, umran, value-based, ummah-centered, not individual, not society, it's ummah and taskhir. Brothers and sisters, in simple terms, to summarize and to end, inshallah, let's talk about Islamic sustainability. The Islamic sustainability talks about man, universe, and life. It talks about managing man, ummah, and society, managing nature and environment, and managing life. So it's important to have a worldview, a balanced hayatun tayyiba, a value-based system, a balanced economy, a stable society, a strong ummah, and so on and so forth. It's important to have good governance, good leadership, good education, and so on and so forth. I move forward. Now, I wanted to single out specifically this Islamic view of environment, because in the model of sustainable development today speaks about the three dimensions: the economy, the society, and the environment. Let's see what we have here. In this model, we talk about the human, social. The concept of environment itself in Islam has few dimensions. The natural dimension, or the natural environment dimension of environment, where we talk about the living and non-living, talk about earth, about heaven, about sea, about air, about resources, about musakharat, about tayyibat, about geographical places. That's all there. Then the other aspect of environment in Islam is the human environment. There is one scholar called Ibn Abdu Rabbihi, the one who wrote the Al-Aqd al-Farid. He is the first, I think, human scholar who defines environment in a technical manner as you define it today. In his book, Al-Jumana, he says environment means the social and natural space in which people live. And that environment and social space has impact on people, on culture, on health. And we need to address this. The other aspect, it's the human social aspect of environment in Islam, is life, transactions, relations, culture, civilization, ethics, economy. The last, I just moved, the divine spiritual aspect of environment. Brothers and sisters, we look at the environment like a source of energy, no, that's for a Muslim. In our model, what you see as appearance is the least thing you should take care of, or you should care of. What you should care of is the sunan of Allah in the environment, the ayat of Allah in the environment, the asma of Allah in the environment, the system, the aesthetics, that's the education that we want. That's the new knowledge which we want when we teach sustainable development. So I just move as time does not permit. This one just I talk about a spiritual environmental ecosystem is needed. Brothers and sisters, to end, in order for this concept of environment, brothers and sisters, Islam doesn't talk only about taskhir of environment, doesn't talk about the use of the resources. There are 5 degrees, 5 levels of dealing with the environment, with the universe. The level one is, the Quran used the term tamheed and tadleel, means Allah made the earth, made the universe, made the resources, made all this ready for you. Tamheed, mumahad, ready for your use. Then we go to the level of taskhir. The opposite of this is the negative exploitation and ethical use and misuse of the universe. The other level, how we deal with the environment, is the ta'mir. The umran, the ta'mir, doesn't stop only there. It's not only about that. We do taskhir, we do ta'mir, and then we do protection and ri'aya. We preserve and we care for the environment. And the last level, which is islah. Look at this, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. لا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها. Don't create corruption and mischief and trouble and global warming and all this on earth after it is made Islah. So brothers and sisters, these levels need to be addressed. So there are many things here to address, but unfortunately, I need just to end with this great saying of this scholar: stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. So my contention, my submission is that the Islamic thought has challenges and has priorities, and we need to take the priorities. We need to take the priorities at at all these levels: the conceptualization and theorization, the implementation, the evaluation, the critical assessment, the impacts, and we create a new culture. And the last thing I want to say, Islamic thought need to think system analysis, need to think multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and I think sustainable development is one example. And for that matter, I thank our university actually as just a small university championing sustainable development from Islamic perspective, from Maqasid perspective. I tell you, this is a revolution in when you go and see what's happening in other secular universities or in many other places in the world where the secular model is dominating everywhere. But as the norm says, we need time to improve and develop things. With this, I thank you all for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Dr. ABDELAZIZ BERGHOUT, for his presentation, in which you have emphasized a comprehensive framework for our goal to have an Islamic sustainable development. We have, alhamdulillah, come to an end of our session, but we should entertain some questions. We have many questions. I don't think that our time will allow us to entertain all questions, but there are remarks by many people who say that this webinar has eliminated the misunderstanding with regard to sustainable development goals. So the discourse that we had just now heard has helped them a lot to understand the sustainable development in the context of IIUM, as well as in the perspective of Islamic worldview. So while waiting for other questions from different participants, let me directly go into some questions to request some of the speakers to answer. Question number one is directed to Professor Dr. Muhammad Kamal Hassan. How does definitional construction of sustainable development lends itself into operationalization? This is particularly important because development is essential about doing, and this evokes the needs to have operational definition.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Prof. THAMEEM, I'm sorry I did not really get the question. Could you just repeat and go a bit slow so that I can write it down.
Definitional construction of sustainable development.
Repeat again. I missed the beginning.
How does definitional construction of sustainable development lends itself into operationalization? This is particularly important because development is essential about doing, and this evokes the needs to have operational definition.
Yeah, I agree with you that we need to move from this conceptual to the operational. And well, when it comes to the operational, I would prefer that we get the input from the practitioners, from those who are actually actualizing the ideals in the socio cultural, economic, and environmental context, because it's from the waqi', from the reality on the ground, then we can really what do you call it? We can really come out with the different steps, practical steps to reach the goals. So I have not addressed the operational definition. I expanded on the conceptual, which I thought was quite restrictive. You know, most people go back to the Brundtland definition in 1985, and even the needs are not really defined. And what I tried to do is, rather than talking about operationalizing, meeting the needs, is needs in Islam are not just physical. In fact, the most important need is a spiritual, and the SD doesn't address that at all. So conceptual clarification and improvement is necessary. Then once we, and I think all the 4 or 5 panelists have actually enriched our understanding of the conceptual. It is much broader, deeper, wider than what the UN SDG has formulated. So then talking about operationalizing will be the next important step. So I have to leave that to people like Tan Sri Zul, because he is always operationalizing it in the campus, in Gombak, and wherever he went. So maybe Prof Zul could come up with the operationalization of this. But I think it is important that we get a consensus, at least a majority view about the broad, holistic, all-comprehensive concept of sustainability and development. And we got that in the presentations just now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Tan Sri, would you like to add something?
Well, I think there's no short answer to this, but yesterday we had a session on Istidamah, reviewing what we have done for the 1 semester of the UNICOR. If I'm not mistaken, the course is UNGS 1201.
Yes.
Right? It is quite apparent, I think, in that discussion, just to summarize, that the students are able to operationalize this. I mean, given all the conceptual framework, the understanding, the deeper understanding of what sustainable development within the Islamic view, we are not compromising that at all. But I am very, very happy to find out that there are now expression of students taking this and operationalizing this. And in fact, yesterday, Prof. Kamal, we are able to identify one project that is suggested by the student, which is called the Sejahtera Shop. And I was very excited to see this. I thought it is only a project that is on the ground, but they are just thinking to implement it, and we've picked it up. We've picked it up to show that the students could operationalize this concept just within 1 semester, and inshallah, in the 2nd semester, we want to show that this is actually a workable solution. My training, I think, quite different from Professor Kamal. I'm a medicine seller. I'm a pharmacist. I sell medicine. And in selling medicine, the first question they ask you, what is the evidence that this medicine works? If I don't have the evidence, then I will not be able to sell my medicine. So my priority is basically, I want to find the evidence of what works. And once the evidence is there, then I think we can sell the idea better to other people. So we'll try, inshallah. I know this is a very urgent question, but we will try. And this university, like Professor KHAIRUDIN say, yes, we want to be the place where you come back and say what is workable and how do you actually shift the position of university towards sustainable development in the Islamic context, inshallah.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri. In fact, in yesterday's Istidama, Tan Sri Prof, the presenter who was a student who has done this project on sustainable development application by coming up with this JAKARTA shop, said he has 50 volunteers to really take into the project.
Inshallah.
It was very interesting.
You were there, yeah.
Yeah, I was there.
Thank you.
So this next question is sustainable development as a concept and as a new proposition on how to do development is rooted in Western construction and secularistic rendering of development. The epistemic and ideational basis of development so construed differs from Islam. Therefore, the question is, should we frame and seek to understand development from such a Western rendering of SD and development generally, or frame our own thesis of development, which I think won't necessitate the call that doing development be made sustainable? So this is an open question. Any presenter can respond.
Could I give a shot on this one? I would agree with Professor Kamal and the rest that the definition that was given by Brundtland's report, talking about the present and the future, is not sufficient. In fact, our definition, at least my point of view, we was asking, what about the past? Because when you talk about the future, it's already a compromised future. The future is already unsustainable, as it were. And if you move forward from this present to the future, you are just taking whatever is not sustainable forward. So we are looking back. I mean, in many respects, I agree with Professor Kamal that the sustainable development concept, it may be in a different word. It may be Al-Falah, I'm not too sure. But there is already this concept Islamically, and in fact, indigenously in many societies, the sustainable development, if you talk about balance, if you talk about moderation, if you talk about compassion, I think it's already there for a long time. And therefore, there's a need to go back. So our definition is, where is the past? And this is where it allows us as Muslims to go back to the days of the Prophet. I was reading, and I'm not very good at this, but there's a concept called hima, if I'm not mistaken, where the whole concept seems to mean like a sustainable development concept, that you preserve environments, that you make sure that this harmony within society is there. And I think these are the opportunity that we have. From the non-Islamic point of view, we have done 3 research. We have looked at Bali, when they look at the Subak system, where the rice growing system, that system has existed for more than 1,000 years. And that Subak system still stays, although it is now facing a lot of challenge, but the Subak system is there. When you go back to Thailand and look at what the former king, and we talk about sufficiency economy, that has been there more than 100 years. We go to Bhutan and we see where Bhutan comes out with a gross national happiness. That has been there more than 500 years. So in other words, what we are talking about, we are not hung up on the definition given by the West or United Nations or Brundtland report, but we want to use this to leverage and see how else we can expand the idea so that other values come in, including Islamic values. And I think this is where I hope this seminar would enlarge and enrich it and see how far back can we go to the days of the Prophet and see whether the sustainability concept is there. And like Prof Aziz say, I'm quite happy to know this Maqasid Al-Quran. It is something that I learned today, that we can now try to see whether the concept has been there for a long time, rather than just talk about Maqasid al-Sharia as such. I hope that makes sense to you.
Okay. Thank you, Tan Sri, for your answer. The next question is, should COVID policies and fatwas have a life-wide learning approach, especially in the context of today where we have social economy and politics to be involved? I think he's referring to your slide on lifelong learning and life-wide learning. So how it is related to COVID-19 policies, how they will affect our life-wide learning and things like that.
Well, basically, my understanding of lifelong learning and life-wide learning is also, I hope, in an Islamic concept, because we are here to learn. I mean, knowledge is part and parcel of the Islamic mission. I mean, the hadith of the Prophet that I know a little, that you go to China to learn. I mean, you learn from every nook and corners as long as the knowledge is beneficial. So I guess whatever term you call it, as long as it adds and enrich and make you a better person, I think that's the mission that we need to follow through. We need to do comparison, we need to learn comparative so that we know at what point we can sort of influence the other party in the context of comparison. Let me give you a simple example. Before sustainable development, when we do the study, when we look at Christianity is not for sustainable development. I mean, there's the whole work that talked about Christianity and sustainable development does not go together. And this is where I think Islam has got an advantage in trying to understand where is the knowledge and how do you look at knowledge. So now now we are going to revise, I think in Berlin in May, we're going to revise the concept of what education is all about. And this is where I hope Muslim scholars can bring into bear what is the understanding of knowledge as far as the taxonomy of knowledge, the deepening of knowledge. I think I'm sure we have got a different understanding when you talk about morality, family life, or religious values, spirituality. These are the things that I think we need to fill in when we talk about all these other things that that is now brought to us, not as a kind of a mandatory thing, but we need to redefine it and make sure that it is within the ambit of the Islamic sort of perspective.
Okay. Thank you, Tan Sri, for your response. And we will now move on to the next question, which is directed to Associate Professor Dr. KHAIRUDIN Junaid. Muslims know that having a good soul is one of the fundamental elements to sustaining the world's ecosystem. Yet, such nonsense is rather silent and at best scoffed as unscientific approaches. How can we effectively bring this element to the mainstream thoughts on sustainable development when there is hardly any program that hybrids the soul and development, let alone sustainable development?
Right, thank you for the question. I think the first thing that we need to figure out is what do we mean by mainstream? And I finished reading a book by a psychologist. His name is Bew Lotto, an American psychologist, who talks about how our brains actually structure how we view realities. And I think one of the problems that we have among Muslims is that because there are so many of us, 1.6 billion in the world, we view our mainstream as Muslims ourselves. That means we always usually talk to the converted. And that applies to everything that we do, be it the things that we create. Last time in Malaysia, they tried to create an Islamic car, and I don't think that project actually worked, to everything else. So this links back to the earlier question that Prof. Zul actually answered. In order for us to operationalize what we talk about and make it mainstream, we need to approach it from 3 levels. First is we need to be at the forefront of the knowledge industry. Never mind if IIUM is a small university. What is most important is for IIUM to give rise to cutting-edge research that speaks not only to a Muslim audience, but also to a universal audience. And this is our challenge, to produce knowledge for the whole of mankind. Prof. Osman Bakar actually emphasized this in his book that I mentioned just now, that one of the tragedies of modern human beings, modern Muslims, is that we like to talk to each other. And this has been the case since after the Second World War. And we need to get out of this shell. Only then can our ideas become mainstream. So we need to participate in mainstream or so-called universal discussions and put our universities out there in terms of innovation and knowledge production, and reach out to everyone and everyone in the world. So that's the first, the knowledge. So to operationalize and to make our ideas mainstream, we need to produce knowledge that are powerful enough for the world to see as equivalent to what they are producing. The second thing is our products. What is it that we have produced? One of the critiques of Islamic science is that the philosophy of science has been resolved, that it has to be Islamic. But Islamic science has not produced a product that the world can use. And this is what we are lacking right now. Muslims are not thinking and working hard enough to produce things. And here we're talking about physical things that the whole world can benefit. A simple thing, Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi said one of his khutbah, that one of the problems with Muslims is that we cannot even produce a screw for a car that could be bought by people all over the world. We cannot even produce a screw, he said. And this is the thing that we need to go into. And IIUM can start this, especially the science and the engineering and other faculties, to produce things that would not only benefit Muslims but the world. So the product part. And to make our ideas more mainstream or more globally recognized, we need more activism. And I think this is a bit lacking at the intellectual level. We need more movements that would question realities, that would be hard on ourselves. And I think one of those things that we don't like to do is to criticize ourselves. The West has this edge over us. They are hard amongst themselves, right? And we need to start having this and to be brutally honest about our conditions. We need to have movements who go out there to talk about the problems that we see in the Muslim world and how we can change it. Then everything that we produce, the talk about the soul, the talk about religion, the talk about family values can be accepted to the rest, by the rest of the world. Take note, we are not lacking of theories in the Muslim world. We're not lacking of models, as Prof. ABDELAZIZ have already spoken to us just now. We lack people who can talk to the larger non-Muslim public that consists of 5 billion people of the world. And we need to produce such people who are confident enough to communicate our ideas to the rest of the world. And this is the most urgent thing that I think IIUM and other universities out there and other institutions and movements out there has to do right now. Only then can they accept our ideas and as part and parcel of the universal ideas that is out there right now.
Thank you, Dr. KHAIRUDIN, for your response. In fact, in the IIUM, we have been discussing this dimension of how to talk to the other people, particularly to non-Muslims, to convey our message in the scientific way that we discussed in our university. Okay, this question is directed to Professor Dr. ABDULAZIZ BERGHOUT. Should we focus on translating maqasid to drive development rather than trying to force fit sustainability thinking into maqasid al-shari?
Thank you, Prof, for the question. In fact, we need to understand how change happens. We need all the dimensions of change, because I see some of the comments. Sometimes they say why we are not operational, why we are not implementing, why we are not talking, we're just talking about theory, and so on and so forth. I think we need to understand the dynamics of change itself, whether in educational institution or social institution or in any other institution. For example, the idea of operational definition
sometimes operational definition doesn't come haphazard, doesn't come from the sky. They come from a real context. When Islamic civilization was in the peak and they have the backup of the real implementation of the model, whether in governance or in economy or in halal, or then they can link directly. I give example, like now in Islamic economics and finance. Alhamdulillah, for the last 30 years, we were striving. Now we can develop the operational things. We can see the products. We can see the thing. But when we come and talk about concepts, which are still, very nice concepts like hayatun tayyiba, the desirable life from Islamic perspective, but you have to see it. That's why action is important, doing is important. Now, this is an introduction. For me, we can do both, because we are not talking about our university or one place, or we are talking about the Ummah and the Islamic thought evolving and developing to address the issues. So we can use Maqasid al-Sharia as a framework to guide the sustainable development. And I tell you that most of the sustainable development, these 17 aspects or goals, they are all there. You think Islam will not speak about poverty or hunger or justice or cooperation or resources or protecting? It's all there. What Maqasid Sharia does is to give you, to link you to the real, means you are doing it from a Maqasid Sharia, means you feel that, yeah, that's the Islamic approach, that's the Islamic model that can solve issues, that can help solving problems. So we can use the Maqasid Sharia now to guide whatever activities we do in sustainable development, goals or any other things. We can, in fact, based on the Maqasid, develop other practical areas. And as I said, we can also link the Maqasid Sharia to the Maqasid of the Quran, and we open up. We can, that's why the idea in the end is, where is the project of Islamic thought to develop the Ummah? The project of Islamic thought or contemporary Islamic thought to build the Islamic civilization which we are looking for. When we have that articulation, then we will see what are the gaps. We have problems in education, we have problems in governance, then we meet, we fill up the gaps. But when you work and you don't have a direction, you don't have a roadmap, you don't have a vision, you don't have this, we are segmenting the processes so that always the question will crop up. Oh yeah, you are more theoretical, we are not practical, these people are practical, these people are not. Why? Because we are having a cultural and mind issue. We need to address the personality issue, the mind issue, the thinking issue, the multidisciplinarity issue, the ability to think comprehensive. These are the things. That's why I think Maqasid al-Sharia can be a great framework so far for the development and advancement of the cause of sustainable development, because Maqasid already Sharia can help you see what is right, what is wrong, give you the ethical framework, give you even the examples under the idea of relating Turath to our time. Now, the other way also, you can look at sustainable development today. If you go and see the science of sustainable development is a very huge, extended science of multidisciplinary think. From there, you can see, you get the questions, you get the priorities, you see what is the concern there. And then we come back to the Quran, the Maqasid al-Sharia, to develop our answers. It's a dynamic. It's a dynamic. We need to understand the dynamic. It's not like one-way traffic, this way. It's all happening in a real context where many dimensions. That's why system analysis is very important to an extent to understand how to solve this type of problems. Thank you very much.
Okay, there are many questions. I do not know whether we can entertain all these questions. And I will choose one last question from the question bank that I have. because of the time constraint, and we would like to end our webinar by 1:15. So the last question here is, in the operationalization of sustainable development concepts, what is the Islamic guidance in prioritizing competing interests in natural resources, especially where conservation and material and urban development collide? It's an open question. Any of the panelists can respond.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think first of all, we need to develop from Islamic thought first, the basic philosophy and theology, and also fiqh in certain field of life. For instance, in order to preserve land, for instance, we need to have philosophical and theological view, Islamic view on the land, or on whatever, yeah, on earth or something like that. And then we need to also reconstruct fiqh. Fiqh is, of course, the Islamic jurisprudence, the practical guidance, how to conduct, how to perform things according to Islamic injunction, yeah, Islamic injunction. So, for instance, in Indonesia, we develop a fiqh on the use of zakah, Islamic philanthropy, for environment preservation, for instance, for ecology, how you to do it, how do you do it? Islamic philanthropy like zakah or infaq or sadaqah or waqaf, not only for the 8 asnaf, but also for a much wider programs in relation to SDGs project, including also for the preservation, for the protection of women and children's life. For instance, we need to formulate a fiqh on women's life, fiqh on women preservation, women protection, children protection, by using, for instance, Islamic philanthropy. And of course, in Indonesia, we now, philanthropy is developing quite rapidly. So we can use this Islamic philanthropy fund for many, programs in relation to SDGs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for your response. Is there any other panelist willing to respond to this question, or?
Prof.
Yes, most welcome, Prof.
Yeah, Prof. Can I just add what has been mentioned by our Prof? I think this question of prioritizing competing interests in natural resources, I think this is a question of each and every country. And also, it needs to be posed at the Ummah level. To answer this question, we need to start thinking, as I said, the bigger picture. So we need to come and see how the Islamic Ummah, like the OIC country, as Prof. Kamal mentioned, what is the vision, what is the blueprint of the OIC vision as a whole, which actually one of the big Islamic groupings. Do we have a blueprint for to answer or to address this question? And for that matter, the other areas of economic cooperation, of environment cooperation, of education cooperation, we need to look at this from a bigger picture, because the question we can give you a lot of guiding principles from the Quran and Sunnah, but when it comes to the practical side, we need to see, because these things are related to implementation, to policy matters, to the economies of Muslim countries. So we need now within the OIC to start integrating the idea of real cooperation, whether at the environmental and natural resources use. There are some countries who are advanced in certain knowledge, in certain governance and management and policies and applications of the Islamic
concepts, let's say, of protecting and conserving the material, the resources, we learn from them. What do we learn? How to learn? How do we pass the knowledge? What the political institution can do, the social institution, the educational. It's a question which needs not, let's say, a very simple answer, but it's a complicated one. But in the end, we need, as I said in the beginning, we need that type of comprehensive thinking which combines the theory and the real things that's happening, because thousands of activities are happening under sustainable development in Islamic societies that we don't know what heading where, and what are we going to achieve after 30 years or 50 years. Are we getting the real right substance and vision for it, or we just do activities for the sake of doing activities of sustainable development? That's why I said the issue has to be dealt also as a cultural issue, as a mind issue, as a behavior, as an attitude. We have to change the mind not only of the scholars and teachers and students, but the whole society need to engage if we want to see a different perspective of sustainable development from an Islamic perspective. Many things has to change. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dr. ABDELAZIZ Berghout. I have a request from the participants. They say that they have so many things to seek clarification, and there are many questions, and they're even proposing a continuity of this seminar for another occasion, so that all these questions can be answered.
It's a monthly thing now.
Inshallah, we will try and discuss at our committee level, and ISTAC will be organizing series of seminars. As I said to Translate yesterday, that we will have a seminar in March, April, May, June, and July. We have already decided the themes for every monthly webinar. Inshallah, we will communicate with you. And I'm quite satisfied with the participation of the people from different parts of the world. And we have seen on the screen the maximum number of participants, which is 300. Apart from that, people were following our program in Facebook and YouTube. And this is a quite successful program. And I thank everyone who was contributing to the success of this program. And on behalf of International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, first and foremost, I would like to thank our Honorable Rector, Chancellor DZULKIFLI, for giving his precious time from 10 until 1:20, although he has too many important activities to attend. But he has given priority to our webinar, Alhamdulillah, and because of his presence, we were able to have this successful program. And on that note, I would like to also take this opportunity to thank Professor Emeritus, Chancellor Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan for his valuable time for 3 hours, and then Professor AZRA from Indonesia, Associate Professor Dr KHAIRUDIN from Singapore, and also Professor Dr ABDULAZIZ Berghout. These panelists have really sacrificed their 3.5 hours to really help us in clarifying the issue of Islamic thought and sustainable development. And before I end, I would like to take this opportunity to make one announcement, which is very important from our point of view, which is on the 27th of January 2021, ISTAC will be organizing a virtual national conference on Rahma and Karuna, compassion as common ground for building relations between Muslims and Buddhists. This conference will be held on the 27th. I would like to request all those participants who have participated in this seminar also to register and benefit and support our ongoing programs. So with this, I once again thank the participants who have been with us from this morning until now, and for their attempts to ask many questions. And they have given hundreds of comments, which I have in my phone, and Sister Hasina has also informed me through the phone that there are many questions which are really unanswered because of the time constraint. So this shows that we have the concern for Islamic thought and sustainable development. Inshallah, we will try to organize another seminar in February, which will be in line with this, but we will have a different topic, and we will bring Islamic Sharia dimension also as well to have the clarification on Islamic sustainable development. So with this, once again, I thank all the participants, including the Chancellor Rector and all other members, technical staff from ITD, technical staff from ISTAC, and all other participants. Thank you all very much. May Allah bless every one of us, inshallah. May Allah protect every one of us from this COVID-19. May Allah protect the whole ummah, the whole of humanity from this virus pandemic. And we hope to have a good life in the light of what we believe in Maqasid al-Sharia. With this one, I once again thank all of you. Wa billah tawfiq wal hidayah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I think you end it very well. Alhamdulillah.